Good evening. It is 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, November 3rd, 2021. And this regular meeting of the Sandpoint City Council is now called to order in the council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street in Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I am Mayor Shelby Ronstadt presiding. Also present are councilors Shannon Sherman, Deb Rule, Joel Aspiro, John Darling, Kate McAllister, and Andy Grote. We'll now rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll start with announcements. First of all, I want to congratulate those who were victorious in the election last night. It was quite a race. So we look forward to the new council members serving with us. And I also want to just take a word to say, me personally, I was disappointed that the local option tax didn't pass, but I think that is a very special opportunity for Sandpoint residents to find fairness and equity in our taxing. And I will continue to fight for the opportunity for Sandpoint residents to get fair and equal participation in contributions to our infrastructure. So I don't think that's the last we'll see the local option tax. But moving on, I would invite council members to make any announcements that they feel obliged. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I just would like to acknowledge the passing of Stephen Drinkard, who was the city grant writer for many years and a really great citizen of our community. And he did quite a few things for all of us, even though you don't know it.
Thank you, Councilman. I appreciate that. He was a really good person, and I agree. He did a lot for the city, and we'll miss him. Any other announcements from council?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I want to also thank the citizens for going out and voting yesterday. Congratulations to Jason, Justin, and thank you for trusting me for another 4 years. So thank you, everybody.
Great. Staff.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, a couple of announcements. Leaves are dropping, and this year we have 2 leaf pickups, and I see people getting ready for leaf pickup number 2. That starts the week of November 15th. So reminder, you need to have your leaves out at the beginning of the week. So we make one pass through town to pick those up. So plan on having your leaves out by the 15th. Second announcement, with Jason Welker, who is currently our Planning and Zoning Commission Chair, moving to City Council in January. That will create an opening on our Planning and Zoning Commission. We also have a couple of other commissioners whose terms are expiring at the end of the year. So we will be posting applications for Planning and Zoning Commission here by the end of the week, and accepting applications through the end of the month in November to go to mayor recommendation for appointment in December, so that we have a full Planning and Zoning Council in January. So we've got a number of matters coming before Planning and Zoning, so that will help us with transition in that regard. Also, we are still accepting applications for Arts, Culture, Historic Preservation, our combined commission, and I will include that in our announcement this week too, so people know where to apply for that. And hopefully with the same timeline, we have a position that we will be posting to support those efforts that's in our approved budget for this year. So that also will be going up within the next week. And then finally, a couple of staffing introductions. I want to acknowledge in the back of the room, Jenna, who is our new help desk tech. So council members, if you have any assistance you need with technical needs, emails, things like that, Jenna is on staff and is available to help with help desk requests. And she's also running our cameras. Kevin's here tonight as well, training her. But he's handing over the baton for most of these meetings to Janice. So we have a new face in the back of the room. And then finally, we had announced at an earlier council meeting that we do have an interim city engineer from Jacobs Engineering, Betsy Roberts, who comes to us with a significant amount of experience. She works regularly and recruited Darren actually to Jacobs Engineering, and Betsy is here tonight. And I wanted to invite her to come up and just do a quick introduction and background for council and for the public. She and Darren are working here this week. I've been doing a lot of site plan reviews and things with the rest of our team and working with our developments in person. So welcome, Betsy, again, and thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you, Mayor and Council. It is certainly a privilege and an honor to be here and working with you all. I'm really excited about it. I've had an incredibly warm welcome from your staff and the mayor, who I met this morning as well. And I'm finding through the day here today that you've got actually an amazing wealth of experience and talented staff here. So I'm really excited about that. I do have about 30 years, just a little bit about me, 30 years of experience. Started out my career as I was going to be a wastewater engineer. That was my education. And I think one of my first jobs was with a city. And I just fell in love with working with the staff, the councils, the public. And so that's really what I've been passionate about, is watching cities grow and trying to figure out how to make things work the best way and always making them work better. Married, have a 16-year-old son and a 15-year-old practically blue heeler dog. So that's kind of me. If you have any questions for me, I can answer any. Otherwise, thank you.
Questions? Thank you, Betsy.
Okay, thanks for the
Nice to meet you.
opportunity.
Is that it?
That's all I have for tonight, Mr. Mayor. And I just finally, for a remark to you and to the council, I'd like to note again, with both Betsy and Darren, they're really integrated as members of our broader team. So they are in role of consultants, and we have other consultants as well who are frequently helping with development matters, because we need experts reviewing traffic plans and things like that. But they're really integrated as a part of our team. So we appreciate them, their work, and their willingness to both work with us electronically and come on site. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, we'll now proceed with the public forum portion of the meeting this evening, which allows the public.
There was a proclamation.
Oh. Indeed. Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right. So November 7th through November 13th is Nurse Practitioners Week. And so I'd like to take a moment to read this proclamation in recognition of such. Whereas nurse practitioners, or NPs, serve as trusted healthcare providers, whereas NPs are at the forefront of efforts to combat COVID-19, educating patients about prevention and ensuring the equitable distribution of vaccinations, whereas NPs work to expand access to care in underserved communities, end health disparities, and combat systemic racism in healthcare, whereas patients depend on the more than 325 licensed NPs in the United States, including 1,400 NPs in Idaho, to diagnose, manage, and treat their chronic and acute healthcare conditions. Whereas NPs provide high-quality primary, acute, specialty healthcare services while emphasizing health promotion, disease prevention, health education, and counseling, and guiding patients towards smarter health and lifestyle choices every day. Whereas the confidence that patients have in NP-delivered healthcare is evidenced by the more than 1 billion visits made annually to NPs across the country. Whereas more than 5 decades of research confirms the high quality of care provided by NPs. Whereas better utilization of NPs through modernized state laws and improved policies creates better health through a more accessible, efficient, cost-effective, and higher quality healthcare system. Whereas 23 states, the District of Columbia, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands have implemented full practice authority for NPs, granting patients full and direct access to the outstanding care offered by these healthcare professionals. Whereas landing governmental and policy entities, including the National Academy of Medicine, National Council of State Boards of Nursing, National Governors Association, and the Federal Trade Commission have taken notice of the benefits of providing patients full and direct access to NP care. And whereas the city of Sandpoint in Bonner County, Idaho is proud to recognize and honor the service of NPs in our community. Now, therefore, I, Shelby Ronstadt, Mayor of Sandpoint, hereby declare November 7th through 13, 2021 as National Nurse Practitioner Week in Sandpoint, recognizing the countless contribution NPs have made over their past half century and will continue to make on behalf of the health and well-being of our citizens. Put my mask on here for you.
Okay.
I'll duck.
Uh-oh.
I think there's some on the
All right.
table.
Well, that's 6 feet. Thank you. Okay, we will now proceed with the public forum portion of the meeting, which gives the public the opportunity to address the council and myself regarding items listed on the consent calendar or on any topic not listed on this evening's agenda. This is not the time to speak on specific items listed on the agenda. If you'd like to speak on such an item, please wait until we announce that item during the meeting. To accommodate both those who wish to speak on general items during the public forum, as well as those who wish to speak on specific items on our agenda, a total of 20 minutes will be dedicated to the public forum at the beginning of the meeting. If you'd like to speak and did not have an opportunity to do so, we will give everyone an opportunity to speak by reopening the public forum at the end of our regular agenda. Before we proceed with the public forum, I'll take just a moment to recite the rules and procedure for public comment during Sandpoint City Council meetings, both during public forum and for other opportunities to speak during the meeting. Please note, if you're attending by Zoom, you'll need a working microphone in order to participate, and you'll need to use the raise your hand option if you'd like to be called upon to speak. When your name is called, you'll see a prompt on your screen to unmute. You'll need to press or click the unmute button in order to be heard. For those participating in person, if you wish to speak, you'll need to complete the sign-up form and hand it to the clerk. The forms are available on the table by the front door, and the clerk is right up here up front. In the interest of time, please do not repeat prior comments made by others, but simply state your support for those comments. Comments shall not be personally derogatory, nor shall they be personally directed at any individual, organization, or business. Public comment opportunities during meetings are for comments only. Do not direct any questions to the mayor or council or staff, and do not approach the dais. If you have any materials for council, please hand them to the clerk up front. Each speaker will be allowed a maximum of 3 minutes. Is there anyone who would like to speak during the public forum? We will start with Janine Shepherd.
Mayor, council members, just here to say a prayer for us tonight. Bless the meeting and bless you. So if you join me in prayer. Dear Lord, we stand before you tonight seeking your wisdom and knowledge. We cannot do this life without you, but we need your hand upon us. We have problems in our city, your city, that we cannot solve on our own. We pray for those suffering from depression and mental illness, Lord. We ask that your divine hand, excuse me, would be upon them. We command the spirit of suicide to leave our county in Jesus' name, and that your sweet peace would settle on everyone here. We pray for anyone who is suffering, that they be returned to their right mind. We pray for the people in the throes of addiction, and we pray that you would heal them, that drugs and alcohol would not have a grip on them. We command the spirit of addiction to leave our county, and that people would seek you, Lord, instead of all the ways we try to fill the place in us that should only belong to you. Lord, our only hope is in you. Please bless the mayor and council members. May your peace rest upon them. May they be diligent in seeking you and your will for our city. May they know of your great love for them and that you long to meet with them. Make yourself real to them and to everyone here tonight. Soften the hearts of all the people. From Numbers 6:24 through 26, I ask, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. Lord, we invite you here and we thank you in advance for what you will do. You are mighty and good, and we love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shepherd, for that blessing. Appreciate that. We'll now proceed with the consent calendar. For the record, the total amount of bills is $308,734.32 for regular payables. Are there any items council wishes to remove from the consent calendar? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion that the consent calendar be approved.
So moved. Second.
Been moved and seconded. This will be a roll call vote.
Councilman Groot,
Yes.
Councilwoman Sherman,
Yes.
Councilman Darling,
Yes.
Councilman Espero,
Yes.
Councilwoman McAllister,
Yes.
Councilwoman Rule.
Yes.
Consent calendar is approved. Next is a presentation from Sarah Linz, our finance director and treasurer, regarding potential water bond refunding opportunities, followed by council action on whether to move forward with refinancing.
Good evening. Tonight, Michael Keith has joined us with Piper and Sandler. He will be giving us a presentation on the refunding opportunities and how the process works, with a recommendation at the very end on what we recommend. We currently have 5 outstanding bonds. We have 1 sewer that will be paid off at the end of fiscal year 22, and 4 water bonds. 2 of them will be paid off at 2027, and the remaining 2 will be paid off in 2042 and 2043. So I'm going to turn it over to Michael to the presentation.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay? Can. Great. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I want to thank you to the city and staff, mayor and council for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. Just quickly about my background, we've been working with the city for actually since 2007. We actually worked on the city's sewer bond in 2007. We were then actually Saddle Northwest Securities in 2016. We did the refinancing of the wastewater bond, which was the 2007 bond that we issued. We were then Piper Jaffray, and now I come to you as Piper Sandler, and we're going to talk to you about the opportunity to refinance the water bonds as Sarah has introduced. And I hope this to really be a conversation. I have a presentation to kind of walk through, as Sarah has suggested, kind of the market and the opportunity to do this, what some of the savings might look like for the city if the council and the mayor chooses to move forward on this. And kind of again the process, but please at any time, if there are some questions that you'd like me or some detail you'd like me to go into further, please just let me know and I'd be happy to review that. So let me see if I can share my screen, okay, and hopefully everybody can see this. Everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So just kind of quickly as an overview, what I was hoping to kind of again review with the council this evening and the city is again just kind of the current market conditions for the bonds, kind of where the interest rate environment is, kind of what are the mechanics of the refunding going to look like from an execution standpoint, if this is something that the city again wanted to pursue. Again, what do those candidates look like? Kind of the team aspect. Again, if this is something you move forward with, there are specific folks that would be a part of this financing team, kind of bond process, kind of what your sell options are. And then just, some of the mechanics that would go along with this, from kind of disclosure ratings and kind of ongoing responsibilities. If, again, if we did a market sell for this. From an interest rate standpoint, I think if anybody has had an opportunity to, look at your savings accounts, I think you probably recognize that interest rates are relatively low, and it's a good opportunity. You can kind of look at the right of this graph that there has been some upward pressure on interest rates. I really feel like this is a kind of a short-term pressure. A lot of this is kind of due to classic economic supply and demand. This is a very typical time of year in October, November timeframe where we see significant volume, especially when rates are low, of folks trying to get projects done and financed before the end of the year and spring construction, refunding opportunities, trying to get those done at the end of the year. A portion of that is also some posturing. If you've been following the news that the Federal Reserve is, going to back off of their bond purchasing program, which is kind of really impacts longer term interest rates, which means that they're not going to be a purchaser in the market for liquidity and may drive rates up longer term. But this graph is actually probably a week old, and we've actually seen a little bit of downtick over the last several days and trading and in the market. So again, I think this is something that's going to ebb and flow. Even at these slightly higher rates than all-time lows, we're still in a really good market. And I think this graph puts it in perspective the best. And so the way to kind of look at this graph and read it, the gray bars going from left to right, and the numbers at the bottom 1 through 30 represent terms of bonds. So 1 would be a 1-year bond, 30 would be a 30-year bond. And the gray bar represents the range of interest rates in the marketplace since 1982. So, if anybody's studied history or were around, we had hyperinflation at the end of the 70s and early 80s, which was kind of those high rates that you're seeing on this gray bar. And we said, we've seen, things kind of ebb and flow, but certainly over the last, 5 to 6 years and longer, we've seen interest rates kind of trend lower. And so the orange bar on this is the average interest rate in the market since then. And that kind of that teal or blue bar, depending on how the color shows up on your screen, is where interest rates are today. So again, we're not at the all-time lows, but we're at close to the lows. So again, this is kind of creating the opportunity for the city to look at the water bonds and potentially save some money. As Sarah pointed out, the city has 4 water bonds that are potential candidates for refinancing, all of which were issued. You can see this with USDA. All of them have an anytime call. That just means that it works really like a mortgage, right? We can go out to the marketplace, we can issue new bonds. From the proceeds of that bond sale, we can pay these off immediately. We have some, different payment dates and maturity dates, and I'll kind of talk about that when we consolidate it, what that means from a refinancing perspective. And at the bottom of this is just kind of a structure of the current debt service of your water issues. Going from, 2022 to 2043, you can see in 2027, that's when those 1997 bonds would pay off and you would see some decrease in debt service. And then 2042 is when you would see the 2012 A's pay off and see, again, some decrease in debt service through that, 2043. From a structure standpoint, again, because these bonds are currently callable, this will look and feel a lot like a loan, at least from kind of a simple process standpoint. The issuer, of course, being the city, would, go to the marketplace, sell new bonds. Those proceeds would be used to redeem or pay off, USDA loans. And so those would, of course, come off the books of the city, and those would get replaced with, you know, the new bonds that we issued, and could be structured at, you know, either the same term, meaning that they would mature in 2043, or, you know, we could look at, you know, accelerating that debt service sum, and I have some kind of slides that talk a little bit about that opportunity as well. From a dollars and cents standpoint, what does that refinancing opportunity look like for the city from a savings perspective? Again, here are the four bonds. The upper half of this graphic that you're looking at is just summarizes each of the loans. You know, callable principal just means that's the amount that's outstanding that we could refinance and replace with lower debt service and principal. Callable maturities, again, 2022 to 2043 on the 13s, 22 to 42 on the 12s, 22 and 27 on the 297 loans. The coupon rate, that is terminology in our marketplace, just really means the interest rate that you're paying on the bonds. So the 13s are at 2.5%, which is the lowest rate of all of them. 2012As 2 3/4, and then your 297 loans are at 4.5%. If you sold bonds today, the lower half of the graphic looks at kind of the savings potential from doing that. So making no other changes to the bonds. On the two longer bonds where you have maturities that go out to 2043, interest rate would be around 2.35%. So on the 2013s, you know, that's slightly lower. On the 2012s, you pick up a lot more in savings. On the 297 ones, the rate's lower on those because those are shorter. The final maturity on those are 2027. So the interest rate associated with refinancing those would be 1%, which is significantly lower than the 4.5%, but they're also smaller and they're shorter. So from a savings perspective, and we'll talk about two different kinds of savings. The one is the cash flow savings. So that's the one where we just say, look, if you were to replace it with this new debt service over the life of the bond, so from 2022 to 2043, you would save $133,000 on the 2013s, a little over $400,000 on the 12s. And then again, you get into the 97s, although we have a higher rate and a lower borrowing rate, they're just small. So there's not as much savings to get from those, but you still save $68,000 on the 97s and $17,000 on the second smaller 97 loan. The net PV, again, that's kind of how we measure kind of the relevancy of the refinancing. And what that does is it kind of takes those future savings and present values and back to today, and said, okay, well, in today's dollars, what does that mean for the city? And you can kind of see how those numbers play out kind of across the board. And we utilize those as a percentage basis. And it's just to kind of put it in perspective that, you know, if we're saving, you know, 68 grand doesn't sound like a lot, but when your par is only 589,000, that's 11%. That's actually a pretty high savings threshold, you know, versus, you know, 133,000 on the 2013s. But it's a much bigger par, so that percentage of savings is much lower on that loan. Any questions on any of that before I move forward?
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I have a question. So you show the, on the bottom line of the slide, tax status, tax exempt. So can you speak to the tax status on the current bonds?
You bet. Yeah. So that's a very good question. I appreciate you asking that question. So tax status is not really from the city's perspective. It's from the investor perspective. So the USDA loans doesn't really matter. You're a tax exempt entity borrowing money from a government, and so you don't pay taxes on it anyways. And you wouldn't pay taxes on these bonds even if we were to issue them as taxable. The city wouldn't pay taxes. That tax status is for the benefit of the investor, and we'll talk a little bit about it. That's also why you have to have a special bond counsel or special legal counsel, which is called the bond counsel for the bonds, is because they deliver the opinion, what's called a bond opinion, that says that these bonds would be tax exempt. And so the investor that owns these knows that any of the income provided from this investment is tax-free. And it's tax-free both on a federal basis and a state basis for them. The benefit to the city of that is that that investor is willing to accept a lower interest rate for that because they don't have to pay taxes on it. And of course, the higher the tax bracket they're in, the more benefit they get from owning the bonds. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You bet. Any other questions before I move on?
Nope.
Thank you, members of the council. I appreciate that. So this gets into the structure a little bit, and it's so you can kind of see the savings pattern is somewhat interesting. It's not level, top to bottom, and it's because the challenges here is we're trying to consolidate 4 loans into one. And what happens is that we have kind of these different payment dates. On the 97s, your annual payment dates are in December 1 of each year. On the 2012s, it's May, and then on the 2013s, it's March. And so one of the things we attempted to do when consolidating these is try to pick a payment date that I think makes sense from a kind of just a fiscal payment policy standpoint, and kind of working a little bit with Sarah on this and scheduling these payments for March and September, September being the principal date. And so they kind of contrast this a little bit with the USDA loans. You pay principal and interest annually. And so you just have one big balloon payment that you make each year. Again, on the 97s, that happens in December. On the 12s, 2012As, that's in May. In 2013s, it's in March. With a bond or what we call a market bond, the expectation from the investors are that they will receive semi-annual interest. So you'll pay interest from this perspective in March 15 and then September 15, and then principals due annually, which is similar to your USDA loans. Because of that timing, and because we cannot extend the bonds past its original maturity, the 2013s create kind of an interesting issue because they mature March 1 of 2043, and we want our principal dates to be September 15th. We couldn't have a September 15th, 2043 payment date because that means we would be extending the bonds by 6 months on this. And so we actually have to shorten it by 1 year. And so because we're shortening it by 1 year, it's pushing a lot of that debt service up. So we get a little bit of savings. We're taking most of the savings in the final year. If it was important to show savings each fiscal year, we could shift the payment dates to March or something else. It just means that those annual principal and interest payments would come earlier in the fiscal year, and we'd want to be able to kind of work with city staff from a cash flow perspective that that would work if that was important to the city. So I just kind of wanted to point that out from a savings perspective, that's why you're seeing that kind of interesting savings pattern on this page. One of the other things I wanted to talk to the council and staff this evening about is some other options that we kind of talked through with city staff. Scenario 1 is the one we just went through, which is, kind of this, all-in TIC where we refinance everything. And that's just a blended rate of the shorter 2027, 1997 refinancings and the longer ones. With a final maturity currently would be 9/1/2043. We'd have a final maturity on the new bonds and at the end of the fiscal year at 9/30/2042. Cash flow savings from that is $465,000. No cash contribution, and that's kind of your net on this. One of the things that we wanted to explore was okay, look, we have some cash that's available at the city, and we could just pay off the 1997 bonds. And so this word's used in our marketplace called defeasance, and defeasance just means rather than issue bonds to pay off debt, you're going to just utilize city cash to pay off debt. That of course increases the savings because we're not paying, the final, 5 years of interest cost. It doesn't, again, it's not much because they're short and they're small, but you do get almost $20,000 more savings by doing that. So again, kind of walking through this, current final maturity, March 1, 2043, we'd still have the same final maturity of 2042. Cash flow savings go up because we're using cash to pay off debt. And so on a going forward basis, you'd have 1.2 million of savings. But from a net cash flow perspective, we have to back out the fact that you're using $764,000 of cash from the city to pay off or to fees those 1997 bonds. If we build off of that scenario, though, and we use cash to defease bonds, and then we say, well, like if the city is already used to paying and can afford, its current payment, why not then accelerate the debt service and just keep the payment the same? And if we do that, it does a couple things for the city. One, it lowers the interest rate because again, the bonds are shorter. So you're going to go from a 2.32% savings to a 2.04% interest rate. Sorry, not savings, interest rate. It takes that, final maturity from what would be March 1, 2043 down to 2038. So we take off almost 5 years off of your water loan debt, and increases your savings significantly by doing that. So you go from a cash flow savings of, just under 1.3 at that 1.248 that we talked about to almost 2.35 million on this scenario. If again, we recognize that we have to utilize city cash to defease those bonds of 764,000, we still get to a net savings of just under 1.6 million. So again, it's almost it's about 1.1, almost 1.2 million more, or 1.1 more than, the scenario where we refinance and defease the bond. So again, I'll kind of pause there. I think that it's a lot of numbers. I want to see if there are any questions from staff or council on those scenarios.
Nope.
Okay. Just from a visual representation, again, this is kind of comparing 1 to 3. One is, again, kind of current debt service structure, what that looks like, how that kind of falls down. In 2022, right now, you're paying just under $1 million of annual debt service on your on your water bonds. And again, if we keep that payment the same and we accelerate it, you can kind of just see graphically that, level debt service throughout from 22 to 38. And again, we're kind of shaving off that 5 years at the end. So shifting gears a little bit, if this was something that the council was interested in moving forward with, from a team perspective, these are the folks that you would want to have kind of in place to execute the bond sale. First one we kind of talked about, that's bond counsel, that's special counsel. That's the one that's going to, help draft any legal documents related to the financing. They also provide that all-important tax-exempt opinion that the marketplace needs to have to assure that the bonds will be tax-exempt. Municipal advisor, that's actually the role that we're in with the city. So we kind of provide, again, the fiduciary oversight, guide the city through the process, making sure that, we review documents, we set up the financing, we run kind of all the analytics, and we set it up ultimately for, sell to the marketplace and kind of work in close contact with the city staff. The other member of the team is going to be an underwriter. There's a couple ways to hire an underwriter. You can go through an RFP process and do what we call a negotiated sell, or which brings the underwriter in at the beginning of the process, and you choose a single underwriter and utilize their underwriting desk. Or the other option is to do what we call a competitive sell, where you go through the whole process, get all the documentation in place, and then you put the bonds up for bid, essentially. And then whoever provides the lowest interest rate is kind of the firm that you would choose in that case. And just kind of given the stature of the city and the nature of the debt service is pretty straightforward. As the city's advisor, I recommend the competitive sale process for this. I think it's an understood process. You guys likely will get a good rating on the bonds. I think it's something where you'll get great results doing that. So if, again, the city decided to move forward with this, our recommendation on this would be a competitive sale. And then the other portion of the team is a bank trust department. And so this is not any bank. Again, this is not necessarily a local bank. This is typically a national bank. There are a couple banks that do this type of work in Idaho, and it's US Bank and Zions Bank are kind of the two candidates for that. Just kind of quickly about the sale process. Step one, which is what we're discussing this evening, is kind of the decision to finance. So it's kind of really looking at, what's the opportunity in front of you, recognizing it is, it will be some staff time kind of dedicated to getting this refinancing done. But, if this is an opportunity that looks good to the city, we can pursue that. We kind of set some savings goals and structure goals as we kind of work through the process. Following kind of the nod from the council to move forward, then we'd move into the next step, which is kind of the preparation step of the process, which is establishing the method of sale, which we kind of discussed, kind of recommending the competitive sale process, preparation of what we call the official statement. That is the document that really represents the city. It's the equivalent of a prospectus statement if you were going to invest in corporate, debt or stock. And it's the document that gets put together and ultimately delivered and circulated to investors to kind of tell them about the credit and let them do their own credit analysis on whether or not they want to be an investor in the bonds that the city would be selling. Preparation of the legal documents. So, again, even with a nod or an approval from the city council to move forward, in the process, we'd still be coming back to the council in the future to pass a bond ordinance. And that is the more formal approval of the bond process and kind of part of the legal document preparation that we would be doing. And then the other thing, and I've got a slide on this too, kind of what this means, we would obtain a bond rating. So this is equivalent to a credit rating, right? Anytime you get a loan, the bank or the lender runs a credit score. In this case, it's a third party that the city goes to ahead of the bond sale to arrive at that credit score and a report that gets delivered to the investors. Once all that documentation is in place, we go to the bond sale process, which is a one-day process, usually in the morning, where we actually set and lock the interest rates, and that's that competitive bid that we would accept on a competitive sale. Once the rates are locked in, you usually have about 2 weeks to closing. That's just finalizing the documents. And on the day of closing is when the funds actually transfer or pay off the existing debt of the city, and you start paying on the new debt. Any questions on the process?
Oh.
Okay, thank you. I won't go into a lot of detail on this. This is just kind of more for the benefit of the council, that this is what a schedule would look like in terms of kind of the process we would go through and kind of week one and kicking this off all the way through, again, that week 15, the pricing, bidding, taking the bids and closing of the transaction. So, it's typically about a, 15 to 17 week process to get this, done. And so we would be selling bonds, locking in interest rates somewhere around the, end of February, beginning of March on this. So that does mean, in the interim, there is, interest rate risk. And, I think the one thing I will say about that is that, one, that's kind of why we set, savings targets, kind of, what we're trying to accomplish, with this, refinancing. The other thing I would also say about this is, other than when we talked about the rating agency, which comes, much later in the process, you can see around, week 10, week 11 on this schedule. Everybody else works on contingency basis. And what that really means is, let's say that the city council decides to, move forward in this process this evening, and we, work on this for the next 3 months, and we get to January and something disrupts the market. Interest rates, spike up. We take a look at this and say, look, I don't think we can meet our savings targets on this. Then we pull back. We just kind of sit on the refinancing. We don't do any other work. And if the refinancing never rematerializes, then the city's not out of pocket any fees. The only time that changes is once we go to the rating agency, because they're a third party and they would have already delivered their report. That is the one fee that has to get paid, and that's depending on the size of the refinancing. That's usually around 15 to 18,000 that would have to get paid. So again, that's something we would check in on the savings before we go to the rating agency process. And it's also why we put it fairly late into the process too, that way we only have about 2 to 3 weeks of interest rate risk before we lock in interest rates for the city. This just quickly is the cover of that disclosure document that I talked about that would get prepared. This is actually one we were working on for the city of Coeur d'Alene that is actually going to price bonds next week for refinancing of some wastewater debt that they have. You can kind of see the essential parts of this, that, there's a description of the bonds, use of proceeds, what the security is, essentially what's being pledged to repay the debt, information about the issuer, which, of course, is the city, provide financial information, kind of the tax and legal information. And then there's kind of some miscellaneous and demographic information will also go into the document. And this is that credit rating that I talked about. So this kind of gives you the grades. AAA is the highest, and then you kind of go down. As long as you kind of fall in, I would say, kind of the A to, AAA category, that's a very good rating. We start getting into the BAA1, and of course, then just the BA1, that's speculative. I'm not concerned about the city's rating. The city's very well ran. My expectations would be, at a minimum, the city would be probably in kind of that A, probably high A1 category, and even potentially the AA3 category. And then kind of the left-hand side, you kind of see what are the metrics that they look at. Some of those are which the city has control over, some of which the city does not have control over. You can kind of look at the economy, tax base, what's going on, locally, not something you have control over. Finances, management, you certainly do. Debt, to a certain extent, you have control over, but not the pension side. But pensions in Idaho are not an issue because of the way Percy is ran, and just kind of how the state of Idaho handles its pensions. And then kind of the last thing to just kind of make the city aware of, something that would be different than your USDA loans that are currently in place, is because these we're proposing market bonds to take these to the marketplace. There are some additional, and they're tax exempt. There are some additional tax compliance and kind of what we call ongoing or continuing disclosure requirements of the city. Tax compliance is calculating, arbitrage, tracking use of proceeds. In this case, it's a refinancing, so there's really not going to be much to track. And then kind of monitoring the projects that are financed with tax exempt bond. Again, these are water bonds, so not something you'd have to be too concerned about. Arbitrage earnings, all that means is that when the bonds are issued, there's that interest rate that we talked about becomes the cap, so to speak, on what you can earn with any of the proceeds that come from that. Again, the proceeds are going to get reinvested to pay off existing debt. So this is not something that's going to be an issue, but just something to make you aware of. And then the ongoing disclosure piece of this is, we talked about that disclosure document. That's a snapshot in time. And so these bonds have a potential to have a 20, 25-year life, depending on the structure you go with, after they're initially issued. And so those investors may trade the bonds eventually in the marketplace, and they want ongoing information on that. So there's a commitment from the city to provide not the whole document, but certain tables on an ongoing basis, and going forward. And the other thing I didn't mention when we were talking about the refinancings is the additional benefit over the savings. I just like to jump back here really quick. Is that under USDA loan requirements, the city is required to set aside a reserve fund for each one of these. And those reserve funds would be released. It used to be in the marketplace when we sold public bonds that investors wanted to also see a reserve. But as they've seen the resiliency really of cities through, not only the pandemic, but, the kind of the credit crisis that happened in 2008. And they kind of quickly realized that, cities are relatively resilient. These are essential service type debt. And it's highly unlikely that folks are not going to pay their water bill or not pay their sewer bill. And so that requirement in the marketplace has been removed. And so if the city refinances these bonds, all the funds that are associated with these could be released, and they could either be released to pay off or pay down these bonds, or they can be released to pay other capital projects that the city may have. So that's just kind of one other point that I want you guys to kind of keep in mind as you think about this refinancing. I think that's it for me. I know that's a lot of data. Hopefully that was valuable, and I certainly want to stand for questions from council or staff.
Thank you, Michael. Questions? Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to say I appreciate you talking about the interest rate risk, explaining that. That was very helpful. I have a question for staff. Saying we move forward with this, what type of time is staff concerned about the time it would take to deal with this? Is that an issue for staff?
The cost savings to me is worth the staff time.
Okay.
So
Appreciate that.
part of the job.
Thank you.
I think the other thing of note for council is the staff recommendation would be this third scenario, pursuing the third scenario that was presented in that PowerPoint.
Yeah, the third scenario, the amount that we were talking about is about $1 million that we're holding right now as the reserve. So that was the recommendation is to use that $1 million to pay off those. So that leaves about 250,000 that we would have in excess, even if we pay off those the two shorter bonds.
And how quickly would we replenish those reserves?
They are reserved. Well, they are reserved because we have the USDA loans. Once those are gone, then we don't have to have those anymore. So they would be used partially to pay those off, and then there would be, like I said, a little bit left over to put into the projects or whatever we deem wanted to.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, members of the council, if I could maybe just kind of clarify that a little bit. When we're talking about reserves, it's not necessarily reserves of the water system as a whole. It's a special reserve that was required to be set aside and encumbered for only the water debt. And it's a position that USDA takes to say, hey, look, if there's some kind of disruption in, water service, or for some reason payments don't come in, for instance, a pandemic or something that people don't pay their debt service right away, then the city has this earmarked set aside reserve that's there that can be tapped to use to pay in the interim the debt service until rates can be raised, or some kind of remedy can be figured out with the bond. So I kind of want to clarify that doesn't mean that you're reducing the overall reserves of the water system down to 250,000. It's just this earmarked reserve that gets released.
Thank you. I appreciate
Those
that.
are actually tracked in a separate fund. They're in not even in our water fund or our wastewater. They're actually in our bond fund.
Okay. Other questions?
Yeah, I had a question. So who started this whole ball rolling? Was that you or was that direction from the mayor? Or how did we get to this point of bringing this to council?
I've been wanting to do this for a couple years because I knew the market had gone down. I just have had other projects I was doing. So this came up when we were going through the water or the bond, and we brought on them last time we talked about this, doing this. No one brought it up besides me. And I know I've been mentioning it to Jennifer. I wanted to look into this. It just became time for me to be able to do it. So.
Okay, then I did have another question. If we can go back to some of those graphs, the gray bars with the red and blue on them. I don't remember which page that was. Or it's the one where it shows we're going to end 5 years earlier.
Yeah, just a sec. Let me see if I can share my screen again. I see that okay?
Yes. That one there. So my concern would be that in the current scenario, our payment level starts to drop off in, I'll put my glasses on, 2028. And because of what we are currently moving forward with sewage treatment, that we are going to have a whole nother set of bonds. That's the way I understand how we're eventually going to pay for our sewage treatment. So that will then be stacked on top of this. So is there any benefit to having in 2028 our overall payments lower, because we are probably going to be adding sewer on top of that? And how does that reflect the shortening overall? Am I making sense? Is that clear?
Yes, and they're two separate funds, so they're completely separate billing. We have a different base for each one of those who pay.
Well, I understand that, but it's still money that the city is taxing or putting out. So it's the overall money that goes, I know it's two separate things, so, but.
And part of the rate study also, as we're doing that at the same time, part of what we're going to be also looking at is that bonding. I'm not sure what else to add to that, but there's different scenarios, and that's why we've thrown them out there. Without having the rate study done at this point and looking at that, we can't really speculate what that's going to do to rates. In my opinion, you can't speculate that's going to do the rates. So I guess I don't know how to answer that with every scenario is going to be something different out there. Yes, it will.
Okay, thank you.
Timing of this and coming to the last council meeting, council approved moving forward with the retainer agreement with Piper Sandler to look at cost savings. It approved us moving forward with our bond council, which in the presentation tonight, and the retainer for the bond council, again, with looking at any refinancing to have savings for the ratepayers in the water fund. That's why we did the bond council agreement at the last council meeting as well. So given the time frame for this analysis for the refunding, that's coming simultaneous with the rate study. Relative to the stacking of the debt on debt, we have bonds as shown here in our water fund. We have loans, which are a result of refinancing bonds in the wastewater fund, and those loans will be paid off in the next year. So that was the purpose of paying those off before moving forward with the rebuilding of the wastewater treatment plant and only doing bridge improvements. So we weren't stacking debt on debt. That's sewer fund stacking debt on debt. With this is our water fund. So you're not stacking sewer fund debt on top of water fund debt. Those are two separate funds with two different ratepayers. And then with those costs, those bond costs being passed in those two different rates. So again, as Sarah had mentioned, looking at this, the staff recommendation was to move forward with the third scenario because it creates the greatest savings for our ratepayers and our water fund. And you'll see those savings reflected in the rate studies and the proposals as we move forward. So that was where we landed with the staff recommendation.
Okay, that helps clarify it with knowing that, yeah, I can't remember all the details of paying off sewer and everything else. So that is helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure I captured everything correctly. In scenario 3, It presented the lowest interest rate. I think it was like 2.0%. We would be able to pay it off approximately 5 years quicker, like 2038, and save about $1.5 million. Is that, did I capture that correctly? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, council?
It's a statement. I appreciate looking out for the ratepayers. So
This is making me look at my inner Dave Ramsey debt snowball consolidation, household financing things. Like, this is big with a lot of comments, a lot of numbers. So far, our listening audience out there to kind of help look at this within their own household and trying to be mature and responsible to their own household debt. This is a very smart, timely, intelligent thing to do as a household. We know that we're moving forward with some other things. So for our staff and our consultants, well done. Good job looking at the bullseye and setting it up. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, one
Yeah,
more point. Mr. Keith mentioned that there are 2 banks in Idaho that finance this sort of work, US Bank and Zions Bank. Is that something that we would be considering working with?
Let me clarify that. So that the comment about US Bank and Zions Bank, Mayor and members of the council, that was for the paying agent services only. So the actual, bidding of the bonds, the competitive sale process, that would be, national firms, much like ours, Piper Sandler. So you would be looking at firms that, that work in this marketplace. So it could be, Stifel Nicholas is one, D.A. Davidson, maybe a name that you know. Those are the types of firms, investment banks that would be bidding on the bonds.
Thank you.
Any other questions, council? All right, thank you, Mr. Keith. Appreciate that presentation.
My pleasure.
Does anyone from the public want to comment on this matter? Anyone on Zoom?
No.
Okay. I would entertain a motion to approve issuance of to move forward with this bonding process, option 3, as was presented. Is there a motion?
second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Roll call vote.
Councilwoman McAllister,
Yes.
Councilman Groot,
Yes.
Councilman Darling,
Yes.
Councilman Spurrow,
Yes.
Councilwoman Sherman.
Yes.
And the motion passes. Next is a public hearing on a request from Lighthouse Incorporated for a comprehensive plan land use map amendment from industrial to context area 3 and a zone change from industrial general to residential multifamily to facilitate the subsequent development of multifamily housing on the site, which is not part of this request, but will be subject to a future application. The site is located at the southeast corner of Great Northern and Woodland Drive. Parcel number RPS 000001036508. Notice of public hearing was published in the Bonner County Daily Bee on October 12th, 2021. The order and procedure for the public hearing will be as follows. First, explanation of the subject of the public hearing by city staff. Second, presentation by applicant. Please note that council members should address their questions to the applicant at that time. Third, opening of the public hearing, at which time the public may provide testimony. Questions should be asked of those testifying at that time. The order for those providing testimony will be as follows. First, those in favor, second, those neutral, and third, those opposed. Fourth, applicant's rebuttal testimony will come next, at which time final questions may be asked of the applicant. Please note that if new facts are elicited during rebuttal, the public will be given an opportunity to comment on any new facts. Then the public hearing will be closed. The council will deliberate and no new information may be provided after the hearing has been closed, with questions directed only to city staff during deliberation. Before we proceed any further, I'd like to ask for confirmation from each council member, please, if you've had any ex parte contact or conflict of interest as pertains to this request.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Deb.
No, go ahead.
Being at the restaurant, I get a lot of customers just in passing for or against something like this. So it will not have any effect on my decision. Just want to disclose that with the public.
Thank you.
No, I was just going to say, very similar people have come to me and I've just stated that, no, it's not something I can talk about because I have to make a decision on it.
Okay. I want to announce that I did have a brief conversation with Kelly Pryor, who's here with us, the CEO of Lighthouse. We spoke briefly about this item. I do not believe that that conversation will have any impact on my ability to make an impartial decision here this evening if I'm called to do so. So I will now yield the floor to Interim City Planner Darren Fluke for his introduction and explanation of this request.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. It's nice to be up here in Sandpoint in person with you all. I'm going to walk through the staff report for you on these two items this evening. And of course, as usual, if you have questions, please feel free to ask me those questions at any time during the presentation or thereafter. So you are going to hear two separate applications this evening. And the reason for that is to develop the property in the way the applicant wishes. They would need a rezone because the current zoning would not allow for the type of development. But to approve a rezone, we do need to change the comprehensive plan because the comprehensive plan designates the property as industrial. And therefore, you would not be able to approve a rezone because the rezone would not comply with the comprehensive plan. So the comprehensive plan future land use map. So tonight we're going to hear the comprehensive plan map amendment first. And when we get to the end of the full presentation, which will include both items, you'll want to make a motion and deliberate first on the comprehensive plan amendment. If the council votes to approve the comprehensive plan amendment, then it would be appropriate to move on and discuss the zone change application. Presumably, you would be then voting to approve the zone change application, but you would need to deliberate on that one separately and have a separate motion. Conversely, if you vote to deny the comprehensive plan land use map amendment, then there's no further reason to consider the zone change application. However, because we have an application submitted, you do need to act on that. And so it would be appropriate at that time to have a motion for denial of the zone change as well. So clear as mud, I hope. And we'll talk about that probably a little bit more as we go through this application. So as you all know, the comprehensive plan map amendment is to redesignate a 25-acre parcel from its current industrial designation to the CA3 designation, which would allow for multifamily. And then of course, a rezone going from IG industrial general to the RM designation, which is the residential multifamily. The site is located here on the south side of Woodland Drive, just to the east of Great Northern. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the neighborhood. You've seen a number of applications out in this area over the last year or so. Next slide, please. So this is a screenshot of how the entire city, including your area of city impact, is designated within the comprehensive plan. So you can see the area in gray with the site outlined in red. That is the full allotment of industrially zoned land, or I'm sorry, designated land within the city now. And the applicant is asking to switch that to context area 3, which is indicated by the sort of gold color. And you can see some to the north of the site, on the north side of Woodland. You have seen an application or two up in that area that did include multifamily. The bulk of that context area 3 designation is more in the southern part of the city, as you can see on the map there, just north of Highway 2. So just not to put too fine a point on this, but the industrially zoned land within the comprehensive plan is described this way. The comprehensive plan does have a sort of, I guess, disappointingly brief description of industrial land. It doesn't spend a lot of time talking about industrial land. My assumption from going through the plan is that the land was basically clustered in and around the airport. The idea being to sort of cluster that type of use that can make use of the IG zoning all in and around that area of the airport, and generally using Woodland Drive as the northern extent, as you saw in the previous map. CA3, by contrast, is essentially your higher density mixed use type land use designation within the plan. And that zone is, appropriate where you've got a full suite of city services, which this site is served by city services. I should have noted early on as well that this is a difficult application for the council to hear, of course, because what we're talking about here are both public goods, right? We have competing public goods, and your job tonight is not necessarily to sort of make a very clear distinction. It's not going to be that easy. I'm sorry that I'm not going to be able to give you a very definitive direction to go in. You're going to have to sort of weigh the needs of the city and these both competing goods as you hear the evidence and testimony this evening. So we'll get into that just a little bit more as well later on. So considerations for you to think about. So your community adopted your comprehensive plan back in 2009. Those plans generally have about a 20-year planning horizon. And generally you'd revisit those around 10 years in or so to make sure that your assumptions are correct and holding, that you have the amount of land that you need for the type of development that you expect. Of course, you were in the process of working on a comprehensive plan when the pandemic hit, and then you've had some staffing challenges since that time. We've not been able to pick that plan back up, both because of the pandemic, but more importantly, because we've been awfully busy just taking care of the development applications that you've been hearing all this last year. And you're going to see some of what's in the development pipeline, or all of what's in the development pipeline, in just a couple of slides more. Tonight, however, though, thinking about the comprehensive plan designation, how does the comprehensive plan arrange land uses? And what it tries to do is balance out the need for industrial type land or commercial type land or residential type land, so that the city has enough areas to grow through time and accommodate the needs for people that want to come to your community either to live or to do business. And so tonight you'll be considering the need for additional residential land within the city. We all know what's gone on with the housing market, and there's certainly a need for more housing of all types, but certainly more housing that reaches that lower end of the market, more what we would consider to be workforce housing. There's also a need for industrial land. You want to have places for businesses to locate and grow within the city. And industrially zoned land is a fairly rare commodity, not only in the city of Sandpoint, but in the broader regional context as well. If you think about the cities of Ponderay, Dover, and Kootenai, there's not a lot of industrial land out there. I mean, the city of Sandpoint really is it. And again, all of that land that you've designated as industrial is largely clustered in and around, or totally clustered in and around the airport. And then you want to think about land use compatibility. The whole idea of zoning arose originally in the turn of the century, from the last century, that is the 1900s, from incompatible land uses and having people living next to uses that were unhealthful for them for whatever reason. The type of uses that you see in industrial zoning generally generate things like noise and smells, and they often operate at hours that are not compatible with people's everyday lives. And that's why we try to separate those land uses. Of course, in recent years, the trend is more toward mixing land uses. You don't want to strictly mix your commercial from your residential, because people need to access those services. But by and large, people work in the industrial zones, but they don't access those services on a day-to-day basis. It's not like you're going to walk down to one of these hangars and access a service like you would a store or an office. And so land use compatibility is important both from the perspective of the industrial uses on residential, but also the residential uses on industrial. Because what tends to happen through time is when you put people's residence in close proximity to heavier industry, the city then it becomes a repository for a lot of complaints about the land uses that are already existing there today and the impacts that they generate on surrounding land uses. Think about airport compatibility and with the operation of the airport. I think the most famous example of this, and of course it's an order of magnitude beyond what we're dealing with here tonight, but is Stapleton Airport in the Denver area. And Denver allowed so many incompatible land uses in and around their airport, and they were suffering so many complaints from people that lived too close to that land use that they were then obligated to literally pick up the entire airport and move it a number of miles outside of the city at great expense, obviously. So, and then finally, just establishing precedent. You may be thinking, this is a one-off parcel. It wouldn't necessarily legally obligate you to approve the next application. Each one of these are site specific and they're handled on their own merits. However, it does become more difficult through time to say no to the next applicant if you approve this type of land use application. Now, that could be perfectly appropriate, and that's what you're here tonight to balance out and to figure out, but it is a consideration as we move through this. So, a large justification for within the applicant's narrative is the lack of housing and the difficulty of finding housing within the area. I did note in your staff report that we erroneously talked about workforce housing. That is not something that the applicant has offered or intends to provide on this site. And that was an oversight on our part for which we regret and corrected that in the staff report. What they did mention a number of times is multifamily housing. Presumably that would be multifamily housing at whatever the market will bear. So that raises the question of if we need housing, where are we with regard to housing in the city of Sandpoint? I went into this in some detail in the staff report. These numbers are a little bit fresher and they are sliced and diced just a little bit differently. But it is important for you to understand what we have in the pipeline today. So the top line there, new units where we have building permits issued, these are on that continuum somewhere from building permit issued yesterday to ready to get certificate of occupancy tomorrow kind of thing. They've had permits issued. They're somewhere in the process of being constructed. And so we're very certain that those 216 units will be added to your inventory. The next line, the new units that are entitled but not yet permitted. And this includes 26 multifamily and 134 single family. So these are projects that either have been reviewed and approved at the staff level or reviewed and approved through the conditional use process and or subdivision process up through the council. And so that adds another 160 units. Now, we can't say with certainty that all of those units will be built, but those are at a stage in the process where significant resources have been expended to get them to that stage. And we do, anticipate that the bulk, if not all of those, will be built. So that gets you to the 96 units, almost 400 units. The third line there, estimated new units. These are projects that are currently in our pipeline. They have submitted applications, they've paid fees, they've expended resources on designing projects and engineers and surveyors and planners and everybody that goes into the pre-development process, all of those what they call soft costs. Another 630 units that are currently being evaluated by the city staff, and some of those will reach up to this body in future hearings. And so that adds another 630 units there. So that gets you about 1,000 units that are somewhere in the pipeline that we have a reasonable assurance that are going to get built at some point. Just by way of order of magnitude, the city has right now just a little more than 4,000 dwelling units according to the 2020 census. So those 1,000 units were they all built, would represent a 25% increase in residential inventory or housing stock within the city. And then the last line, just this is more for your information. These are applications that we are tracking. These are folks that have come into the office and said, say a guy has this piece of property and wants to do this, or just, reasonably firm inquiries about specific pieces of property where we've met in pre-application or otherwise talked in some detail. And so those are far less certain, obviously, but you can see just from the total that there's still, a fair amount of interest out there in the marketplace to adding additional housing units to the city. So I think that's all I had on that slide. This slide here is breaking down the land designations within the city. These are the comprehensive plan land use designations. And what you can see is that you have 452 acres of industrially designated land with the breakdown with the other land uses within the city. Industrial land uses are not allowed in any of the other zoning designations, whereas the most of those other zoning designations do allow for some residential development within them and to varying degrees. Of course, the RM zone is your primary residential multifamily or higher density zone, but RS does allow some little bit higher density. It allows for additional residential, I guess I should say that, as well as your commercial zones also allow for additional residential. Yeah. Next slide, please. So this is showing you a breakdown of the industrially zoned land within the city. The previous land was that land designated by the comprehensive plan. The important number here is what you see on the right-hand side. Of all the land currently zoned industrial, 168 acres of that is the airport itself. That's land that is controlled by the airport or already developed with airport adjacent land uses. There's about 100 acres of vacant industrial land left within the city. And about 25 of those is the application you're hearing this evening. So about 25% of what you have left within IG itself is what you're considering this evening. Next slide, please. Not much more, and not a finer point really to put on this other than to show you a cool old aerial photograph of the airport, which we like, so we dropped that in. But more to the point on the right, if we can go back, Amanda, real quick. You see the property outlined on the right. And so the inner critical zone of the airport is that rectangle around the runway itself, and then the approach zones on either end of the runway. That's where we don't want to see any more residential development whatsoever. You don't want to get rooftops in and around that area. And so basically we don't permit any zone changes or anything that would allow for additional density. Outside of that, you have what's called the lateral safety zones. And I think that's what's on the next slide. Let's try that. Nope. But the lateral safety zones basically limit the height of structures, although they does not restrict additional residential zoning or additional residential. So you can see that the property lies outside of your critical zone there, and it therefore would be allowed, were it zoned properly, to accommodate residential uses. So, next slide. So I think that's a pretty good place to take a pause because that's kind of the comprehensive comprehensive plan context for the city. And next I'm going to pivot and talk about the zone change. But if you had questions at this point about the comp plan amendment, I'd be happy to take those, or we can bust the rest of it. I only have probably a few more minutes.
Yeah,
Mr. Mayor?
go ahead.
I just had a couple questions. So looking at, I guess if we can go back one page where that's a little bit bigger. So you're talking about the lateral zones here. So there's within that purple area, there's an industrial zone. My question would be not relative to residential here, but can other buildings for the purpose of the airport be put in those? Or have we moved into a space with aviation that if it's in there, we're not building in there anymore? And is that making sense, the question that I'm asking?
Mr. Mayor, council member, that makes perfect sense. And yes, that is not non-buildable area. It is allowed to have uses that don't result in sort of a large congregation of people. And so
Okay.
that's what you don't want to get is people who are not associated with the airport in close
Right,
proximity.
right. Okay, so that clarifies that. And then can we go back to talking about what potentially is going to be built and that slide there? Can you give us a little bit better understanding of location of some of this stuff so we can, I mean, is this a lot of U of I property? Is this a lot of infill? What does this actually look like in Sandpoint?
Mr. Mayor, council member, again, fair question. And the answer is yes. To that. It does include the U of I property and much else of what you've seen that hasn't been built. I apologize that I don't have a map for you. We can certainly provide that, but I don't have that sort of map inventory available for you.
Okay, so I guess because of what you said earlier, just moments back, that if we are going to be making a lot of these decisions in the future, I think it would be rather useful to have some sort of color-coded map with what's happening, what's not happening, what stages it is in for the council to look at, and even the planning commission to have a better understanding of what we're providing for the public. And I think the public themselves would also have a better understanding because these numbers are good, but I don't think it really gives us a picture of what's going on. So that would be helpful.
Mr. Mayor, if I might. This updated pipeline staff actually has been working on trying to pull this together and combing through what information we can release, what we can't, because a lot of this is confidential and it becomes a challenge once we create a public record with this because it is confidential information. However, with that said, we are working on getting this laid out in a map. We've came up with a process to do that and numbers came through today. We did a final review. So moving forward, Councilwoman, we will have that go out. We will have that available to council and Planning and Zoning Commission moving forward. What I can say with reviewing this is relative to what areas of town we're seeing development. It is literally every area of town. What you might be familiar with is in our surveys in over the last year, commonly for those who have filled out surveys, you'll recall that we've asked you what quadrant of town you're in. We have it divided up into actually more than quadrants, about 6 different areas of town. And so that we can determine where we're hearing responses from. We use that very same map and kind of that split on town to be able to take these and put that into an area. We can't give specific addresses with some of these, obviously with confidentiality, but we will have that for council and it'll be using that map that the public and council's familiar with from surveys.
And then I guess I'm assuming you would also define that between the multi and the single that is known.
Yes, that is
Okay.
labeled as well.
Okay, I think that will be exceedingly helpful in the future. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, just to add to that, we can easily map and show you those top 3 lines. That's all public record right now. It's just when we speak with applicants, we're not always at liberty to share that.
As much as we can get is good. I understand where we have to draw lines. I'm quite all right with that.
Okay. Anything else on the comprehensive plan, council?
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I just for a point of clarification, you showed the map a couple times and you mentioned that in currently zone industrial or in the comprehensive plan, industrial land is clustered around the airport. I just wanted to ask if we have any industrial land elsewhere.
Mr. Mayor, council member, no. So Amanda, maybe we could go back to that early map on the that showed zoomed out just a little bit. There you go. So that's the extent of your industrially designated land within the city. In gray, sorry, I should have said.
Yeah.
Darren, and so looking at that map, I believe you spoke to it that regionally, the other towns, this is the industrial that they would also use if we were going to put in industrial?
Mr. Mayor, council member, to my knowledge, the other zoning designation or the other land use designations, sorry, let me back up. The other cities, the other jurisdictions do not have any significant or appreciable industrially zoned land that could accommodate larger users, and certainly none that has that ready access to an airport.
Do we have any studies that show like 20 years down the pike, what is coming up?
Mr. Mayor, council member, we do not at present. That would generally be a component of your comprehensive plan. And that would be, we would do a much more, let's say, a deeper dive on a vacant land inventory, as well as a larger just scrub of the demographics and a historical analysis of the demographics, and then try to make some projections that were a little more nuanced than just a straight line projection, to figure out, what we have available in the city going forward, and really where the city might need to take advantage of its impact area to accommodate some of that expected growth. Okay, I think we'll bust through the zone change fairly quickly, and then we can turn it over to the applicant if the council does have additional changes. So just for the record and to be specific, right now, of course, the land is zoned IG, which is industrial general, and that is the gray on your map. I see my from got shifted down just a little bit, and then going to the 2, which also got shifted down a little bit, to residential multifamily. So you can see that, again, the layout of the city, how you have those land uses arranged I should say that those land uses or those zoning designations pretty closely match your comprehensive plan. I'll say that I've seen much worse zone plan conflicts. So this looks actually pretty consistent with your plan. Next slide, please. So the industrial general here, this is, and this is important, this is the purpose statement for the zone. It's intended for lands appropriate for light and medium manufacturing and industrial activities with direct access to major transportation routes, such as arterial roads, air and rail service. Check, check, check. The IG district allows a wide range of manufacturing and industrial uses, which generate little traffic from tourists and general public and are consistent with the Sandpoint comprehensive plan. Commercial uses are generally limited to accessory sales of goods, that is, uses that are not, generating retail type sales produced on site. And so if you're, manufacturing something within the IG, it is permitted to do some limited sales, that we don't generally encourage retail type sales. Residential use is very limited, and the zoning ordinance does allow for caretaker units within the IG zone, but that is extremely limited. That's a single dwelling unit for a single industrial land use. And then by contrast, of course, you're all very well familiar with your residential multifamily zone, the RM zone. It's intended to preserve land for housing and to provide diversity in housing options. It implements the comprehensive plan policies for those areas identified as CA3, which is why that's the request for this evening in accordance with 2009 plan. Next slide, please. When you're considering a zone change, delivery of services is a very important consideration. In this case, it's not a huge consideration because the city is able to provide the services necessary for development with this site, either as an industrial, with industrial land uses or with residential land uses. And if you don't have capacity in one or more given system, such as your sewer or water or road systems, maybe you those considerations are able to be handled through site-specific development applications. And so when we would receive an application for this, whether it's zone industrial or RM, we would evaluate those systems. And if there were deficiencies, then we would have to work with the applicant to provide that capacity. And that's where your transportation planning comes into effect. And it's possible that if you're going to develop this with a significant land use of any character, that you might be helping to improve intersections that are not directly adjacent to the site, that might provide a bottleneck downstream in your transportation system. Excuse me. The development agreement, I have 3 slides on this. Maybe we just go to the last one, Amanda. because I wanted to put the exact text of the ordinance in here. We don't need to go through this in detail. I'll give you just a high level on this, which is that a development agreement is appropriate to use with a rezone because the council is unable to place conditions of approval on a rezone. The primary question when you're zoning land is, does the requested zone comply with your comprehensive plan? In this case, it does not. And so the development agreement is an appropriate mechanism, not to place conditions necessarily, but to reach an agreement with the applicant that were certain factors to be true, then the zone change would be more acceptable to the council. The Planning and Zoning Commission did make a recommendation to you to include a certain percentage of units eventually built within this project as affordable units, affordable as workforce housing. That is not something that the Idaho Code unfortunately allows a city to do. However, if an applicant were to agree to that through a development agreement that were negotiated between the two, then it is acceptable because that's the agreement in the development agreement. However, what's more common that you would see is the applicant has requested that this zone change be granted for the purposes of building multifamily housing. And so the RM zone, while it allows for multifamily housing and is intended to accommodate primarily multifamily housing, allows for a wider range of land uses. And once rezoned, any of those land uses would be fair game on the property. And so a typical use of a development agreement in an application like this would be to say, we agree that we're granting this rezone solely and specifically for the purposes of multifamily housing. And should you, Mr. Developer, not perform within a certain reasonable time, which is again agreed to between you and the applicant, then the zoning would revert back to its original zone. So it's a kind of a fail safe, just saying because things change, not because we don't trust applicants, but because things change like market conditions, we don't necessarily want to make a change that allows for a broader range of uses than we were intending for the property when we considered the zone change. Next slide, please. So tonight, Mr. Mayor, you've gone through these steps in some detail, so I won't repeat this. I will, though, however, reiterate for you on the next slide the findings that are appropriate for the council to make. And that is, I'm sorry, first we're going to talk about your, nope, go back, forward. There you go. So you have three options tonight in considering both of these applications, and that is to concur with the recommendation of the P&Z, which would be an approval of the comprehensive plan map amendment, noting for the zone change, were you to go that route, that we would not be able to build in a requirement for workforce housing that the applicant didn't agree to. You couldn't condition it. You could ask them to agree to it within a DA, but that's a negotiation that would have to happen between the two entities. You could postpone the consideration of the application to get more information, consult with the P&Z, you know the drill there, and you could deny the application. So just to reiterate for you on the next slide, it'll show you that the findings that you need to make in considering the application. And so you do need, if you can't make all of these findings, then really you don't have a basis for approving the requested map. And that is specifically that there's a need for additional housing at this location that overrides the long-range need for industrial land within the community. Excuse me, that the proposed land use designation is consistent and compatible not only with the future land uses that you're expecting, but also with the existing land uses. You have quite a bit of development out there already that is operating with the expectation that they're fully compliant with the conditions of their zoning designation, and that housing on the site will be both compatible with the operation of the airport and existing and future industrial lands that are in proximity. And then finally, the fine print that we followed the applicable laws and procedures for notice. The next slide has the findings for the zone change, and they're similar to the map amendment, of course, and you'll consider these and make a finding on each were you to approve the comprehensive plan amendment. So I think that's all I had for you. If the commission or council, I'm sorry, had additional questions, I'd be happy to take those. Otherwise, it'd be appropriate to hear from the applicant.
Any further questions, council? No, thank you, Darren. Appreciate that. All right, I would now invite the testimony from the applicant.
Hi, council members. Jeremy Grimm, owner of Whiskey Rock Planning. Thanks for your time tonight. I know you're all away from your family and businesses and here to address a challenge that we have in Sandpoint. And likewise, I'm here to help Lighthouse, work through this comp plan and rezone application. And my presentation tonight just helps you better understand sort of the context of what we're dealing with and helps to answer some of those questions that you're going to have to deliberate and answer tonight. So without further ado, I will start here. So some of you remember this. It's one of my favorite cartoons somebody gave me in 2007 when we were doing the comp plan. Sandpoint Quality of Life General Store, horses at a crossroads, going our way yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I've taken the liberty to amend it a little bit and added that little character there, but it's 2021. I hope the roads have not changed. And, the guy's looking at a 2009 comprehensive plan map, and you really are at a crossroads. I think you're all, very aware of the critical need for housing right now. I heard yesterday Abano's is about to close, 41 South. Majority of our employers are struggling to find employees, and the number one driver of that is housing costs. I don't need to educate you on that. You know where we're at. So we are at a crossroads, and unfortunately, we don't have a great comp plan to guide us because the comp plan is over 11 years old now. So Darren did a great job on the presentation. The 10 years for an update on the comp plan, often it's done closer to 7 to 10. So tonight, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the comprehensive plan, talk about our building data, answer some of those questions you had about inventory, talk about the airport, some adjacent land uses, what is our industrial capacity and what's the demand for that, and finally, talk about the area workforce and the economy of the region. So, first of all, jumping into the comp plan, one of the tenets of the comp plan is to limit outward growth, sprawl, and dispersion of housing into the county, and especially the area of city impact. And it talks about that there's a desire to preserve open space in the ACI by focusing development in the city. It also talks about minimizing urban incursion into the city, and it talks about containment of sprawl and promotion of infill development. So I would put forth that what we're proposing tonight accomplishes all of those things in accordance with the comp plan. And then if you haven't gone to the back appendix of the comp plan, there is this action item here, which is the revision of the comprehensive plan, which we had scheduled when I was planning director to occur somewhere around 2014. So, it's outdated. Comp plans are dynamic. They're supposed to take into account changing economic situations and the reality on the ground. So I would encourage you to not lock yourself into the comp plan if you see something needs to be changed, which is why we're here again tonight. Talking about some of the goals and policies of the comp plan. Goal LU1, achieve an efficient use of land in and around Sandpoint, reducing pressure to expand into the ACI. And policy under housing, goal H1B, encourage low to moderate income housing with development incentives like density bonuses or other similar strategies. Well, again, I'd put forth that helping rezone and change the comp plan to provide more housing would be a similar strategy. So look forward to your partnership in that tonight. The big thing, there was a question about how much industrial land do we have? Well, right after we adopted the comp plan in 2009, maybe you're not all aware, but we made some pretty radical changes to the commercial zoning. The commercial A, B, and C zone was changed to allow manufacturing ancillary to a storefront sale, retail sale, up to 15,000 square feet. And the model of this was the Lighthouse Cheese Factory downtown, where you have manufacturing uses going on in and around the commercial area. A little planning history, the original, creation of Euclidean zoning that separated the uses was because back then they didn't have the EPA, they didn't have the DEQ, they didn't have OSHA. So a lot of these manufacturing uses produced horrible fumes, smokes, hazard chemicals, loud noises. Today, we have agencies and entities to regulate that, which is why in 2010, the council decided, oh, it's okay to have some manufacturing. And we've got, Evans Brothers coffee roasters downtown. They're manufacturing. We've got breweries. We've got lots of things. So keep that in mind as I talk about the total quantity of industrial or manufacturing land in the community, because we have far more than is suggested by just the IG zoning. I want to talk next about, this, arbitrary question of what's in the pipeline, what's in construction, what's in entitlement. And ultimately what's important is what's been constructed. This is, you can tell somebody who wants to move here, oh, there's stuff in the pipeline, but what's been constructed? That's where people live. And I just want to jump into that a little bit here to look at, from the staff report, I just want to emphasize that staff does emphasize that, it's not certain that everything's going to be built, but they throw out these numbers of up to, 1,000 plus, potential units being developed. I do have the privilege to represent, I would guess, the majority of those units, not all of them, certainly in various stages of development. And I just want to just enlighten you on what this pipeline takes. You may recall this is over on Church and North Lincoln. Bill Dom here. This was a CUP for a 20 unit development. That was approved in 2020, the spring of 2020. Here we are 2 or 3 years later, and they're not even starting on this. So pipeline, keep in mind, is not something that's going to immediately pop out of the ground. U of I, you're very aware of this. I was here, I think, a year ago tonight for final or preliminary plat. And, we have one house built on this project, and it's been, almost 2 years. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of homes pop out of the ground anytime soon, maybe a handful here or there. It's another one down on Ontario that I've had an initial meeting with the city. I don't know where this is in their pipeline. It's going to be about 17 single family units and 34 total with ADUs, years out, for development and actual construction to occur. So the pipeline is certainly not set in stone, and a lot of these projects may or may not get completed. When you look at the comp plan, directs us at a 2.5% population growth over the 20-year planning period. And that was pretty conservative by the council at the time. If you follow that out, that's about a 2.5% growth. If we've got 4,028 dwelling units, according to the 2020 census, that growth is about 100 dwelling units a year. We need just to maintain that 2.5% growth. Well, growth hasn't been 2.5%. If it had been, we'd be somewhere, well, it thinks we're going to have almost 14,000 people in 5 years. And, that's 5,000 people away. I don't think we've been growing at 2.5%. So I really want to go back and look, because I just get so confused by all these pipeline and construction numbers. And I pulled up the publicly available data for the last 3 years on building permits issued in the city of Sandpoint. And this is just updated a couple of days ago, October. And you'll see up there 0 single family units constructed in Sandpoint in October. Year to date in Sandpoint, as of this report, there were 26 single family units constructed. In 2020, there were 41. 2019, there were 63 for a 3-year total of 130 single family units. Well, we remember before, we needed, from the previous slide, we need about 100 a year to maintain that 2.5% growth in housing units. And just as an illustrative example, the city of Post Falls, which is about 4 times larger than we are, they're doing somewhere around 50 on average, about 50 units, housing units a month. And you'll see that there are no months there with 0 building permits. So I don't know what's going on with the preliminary plat to final plat to building permit, but I just want to show you that growth. Post Falls growing about 4.5% to 5% a year. So our growth, I would suggest, is not some rampant animal that's going to solve all problems or take us over. I want to go back to the comp plan, 2.5% growth. So we need about 100 DUs, dwelling units a year. We built 100, and the demand for the last 3 years would be about 300 dwelling units. So we've supplied about 130. Now, if you add in some of those multifamilies from Prescott and Whitewater up north of Woodland, you get up to close to 272 units. Demand is 300. So we have a deficit of 28 units in the last 3 years. And I would emphasize that a lot of those multifamilies, 142 of them, are age or income restricted. So, a lot of you have heard that people can't take jobs sometimes when they work in those because they make too much money to live in those income restricted apartments. So the net result is a housing crisis. I don't need to emphasize this slide. I think you're all aware. This is recent data on the housing burden in our community. We've got householders who are rent burdened 37% and 47%, and those with a mortgage 37% are rent burdened. So this is crazy to think that this many people in our community are struggling or house burdened by the cost of housing, and I would attribute it all to a lack of supply. I want to talk about the airport real quickly. Industrial land capacity. Just to talk to the airport, it's quite clear that what is a hazard to air navigation. It's defined in the plan, it's defined in the comp plan and in Idaho code. And quite clearly, the requested comp plan and zone change will not be a hazard to air navigation because it will not be creating, structures that include tall structures, smoke, glare, and activities that attract wildlife. In fact, I think housing would probably reduce the wildlife on that site. Moving on, staff analysis says that the proposed residential use is not consistent with the land use pattern adjoining the airport or the comprehensive plan pertaining to the operation of the airport. And I take a little issue with that, and I think it is, and I'll show you why. First of all, from a land use perspective, you look around the airport, the site is hashed there. I think you're familiar with it, but you look at the adjacent and other land uses around the airport. There are residential developments and land uses all around the airport. I don't know what we're talking about here. The airport is surrounded by effectively residential land use. So is that not consistent with the land use pattern? I would argue it's residential on 2 to 3 sides of this parcel. So I think it is. And then looking at the actual comp plan, when you look at the implementation action plan for around the airport, it talks specifically about overlay zones that could include elements such as clustered housing and building placement. So I just don't fully understand how this isn't compatible with your own comp plan, which talks about allowing clustered housing around the airport, and it also the land use patterns around the airport today. It's very consistent in my mind. Moving on to this question of how much land is going to be absorbed by this from the industrial base. Staff report talks about 23% is available. And I guess it comes down to the question of what is vacant land. And I just want to point out a couple of things here. I guess that goes to the internet. Wow. So what is vacant land? I believe, and I'll show you in just a moment, that this rezone and comp plan change would amount to closer to 6% of the available industrial land around the airport, not the 23%. And so what is vacant land? Here's an example of, come on, there we go. This is Great Northern, the Cox property, 10 acres, there's a barn on it. Is that vacant? I mean, could you have an industry or business move in and develop most of that? I think that's completely available for infill development. Another one through the internet. This Timberline here. Again, large 10-acre piece, 9-acre piece available for infill. Is that vacant? It just brings up some great questions. So my question is how much, and I'm sure yours is, how much industrial land do we need? So I do part of this for my work at Whiskey Rock. I do economic analysis, and this is a typical analysis I would do. So this is the Leadlock Biomedical former city incubator property. It's about a third of an acre. In 2014, they had 62 full-time employees there. So that comes out to be about 204 employees per acre. This one is Quest to Hare. They had about 260 employees back in the day. 2.6 acre facility, about 100 employees per acre. This is the actual lighthouse facility. And 266 employees for 2 acres, so 133 employees per acre. So just some pretty basic averages, I wanted to look at, how many potential employees could we have on this vacant land and the infill land? Sorry, zoom, there we go. So we've got about 137 acres I identified in green here that are available for development today. And that includes interstate, I don't think they're going to be there forever. It doesn't make a lot of sense for them. But if you look at the average employees per acre of those 3 businesses I just identified, 146 employees per acre. So if you look at the 137 acres, this is building wall to wall. We have like 20,000 employees out there if we fill that up. So we have huge potential capacity for industrial manufacturing employment just on the land without this comp plan change and rezone. Plus, there's the existing available space. I'm not sure if you're aware, Coldwater Creek is zoned industrial manufacturing. They have about 100,000 square feet out there, according to the owner the other day. Thorn Research. We've got UNICEF, that's 46,000 square feet. They just sold. Based on the housing costs up here, I'm not sure they're going to be expanding. And then Ponderay and Kootenai both have industrial zone lands. I looked at those maps today. So moving on, what does that mean? So, I wanted to show you, this is the projection from the Idaho Department of Labor of employment by region. So this is in the northern 5 counties. This is through 2030. They project that we're going to see a growth of about 1,590 manufacturing jobs in the next 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, according to this actually. So, that's 159 jobs per year. So, even if we absorbed all of the 5 northern counties manufacturing jobs, we would have plenty of industrial and manufacturing space. And I just put that upper bracket there because in contrast, you look at the people that we actually need to keep our town running, and we're going to have 28,000 service, healthcare, and related types of jobs opening up in this area in the next 10 years. 2,800 a year. So those are the people we really need housing for. Manufacturing, I think, it's a nice thing to have, but I'm not sure it's going to be a great future for manufacturing. This is just a quick slide from the National Manufacturing Association showing Idaho manufactured good exports since 2000 to 2019. You can see it's declined pretty precipitously there. So manufacturing is not a growing sector in Idaho, despite our hopes. This is some of the data. It's declined almost 40% during that time period. And then, locally, this is Bonner County employment. From 2000 to 2010, we lost about 373 manufacturing jobs. A lot of those were timber and forest related at the mills. And then from 2010 to 2019, we gained some of those back, but only about 34 a year, whereas we were adding 226 service workers per year. So our economy is changing. A lot of that manufacturing land and industrial land is less important than it used to be. And if you look at Idaho's economy, tourism is the 3rd largest industry in our state. So I won't go into the depth. We all know what's happening with service and workers and employees in our community right now. But how do we support and grow this vital industry in our community if we don't have housing for our workers? So this is my last slide, I promise. This I included in our application. It's a really great brief that talks about this sort of old way of thinking about industrial lands, and that you zone them around your cities because there's transport and there's rail and they're great to have. But what it's found is that in many cases, these industrial zone lands are locked up. They're easily served with infrastructure. There is some harm to the economy because most of them are sitting fallow until someone comes and builds something on them. So the tax base is incredibly low. Driving housing unaffordability because they could be used for housing. They kind of are boxed in because cities grow around them, which is what we're seeing here. So changing them over, the studies suggest that should be considered where severe housing shortages exist. In closing, before I entertain some questions and introduce two people, I just want to talk about the development agreement. Darren mentioned, or the city planner, sorry to be informal, mentioned that you have 3 options available to you. I'd suggest you check with your legal counsel. I think you have 4 options, one of which would be to approve this if you're so inclined without a development agreement. I believe the Planning Commission was a recommendation to you. And I say that because we are very strongly opposed to a development agreement. The concern at P&Z was that somebody could buy this, go through this process, rezone it multifamily, which by the way, only allows single family and multifamily. I don't know what these other uses that could happen there are. That somebody could do that and hoodwink you and effectively go in and build single family expensive homes. Well, rather than tie this up for weeks and months, going back to P&Z through a development agreement, if that's your true concern, and it is a legitimate concern, I think you just change your multifamily zone. Right now, there's a chart. It says single family use is P permitted. You just strike that P and make it C for conditional use. That way, if you want to do single family and the multifamily, you have to come before a body and make your case or make it prohibitive. And that way, you're only going to get multifamily in the multifamily zone. So yeah, we're pretty opposed, very strongly opposed to any development agreement. I want to emphasize that if this is approved this evening, the community and your folks, yourself and the P&Z are going to see subsequent renditions through either site plan review or subdivision process. And this is just the first start to see if we can start to build some housing in this community. As you know, we do have a developer builder who's on the buy side of this as this goes through, Cliff Mort. He's here tonight, can answer any questions that you have, but I'm really, want to introduce Kelly Pryor. I think many of you know Kelly. He's the CEO of Lighthouse. And I thought it was best if Kelly could just say a couple words to let you know exactly how critical this issue is right now. You could either ask me question, let's let Kelly go, and then if you have any questions for us. Good. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thanks, Mr. Mayor and council members for having us tonight. As Jeremy indicated, my name is Kelly Pryor. I'm the president and CEO of Lighthouse. I've been at Lighthouse and in Sandpoint for the last 19 years. And most of you know Lighthouse is a 100% employee-owned company. I thought it would be beneficial for you just to kind of take a step back and see how do we get to this place. We purchased the property in question in 2005 in anticipation of building a new manufacturing facility here in Sandpoint. As good stewards, in 2006, we granted the city an easement at no cost for a residential sewer lift station on the corner of that site for the residential development just west of the property. In 2017, after the evaluation of workforce availability in Sandpoint, the operating costs of a larger facility, as well as the cost of constructing a new manufacturing facility in this community, we determined it was no longer feasible on that site. Like many manufacturers, when evaluating any community for site selection, our top 3 items that we focus on for future expansion are workforce availability and affordability, transportation and logistics of both inbound and outbound, and wastewater treatment capacity. So I can tell you based on these factors, if we were searching for a brand new location and Lighthouse did not exist in Sandpoint, we would not even qualify Sandpoint to get to the next round. My point is not to discount everything Sandpoint has to offer for our community. The employee owners and I personally love it here. But from a manufacturer's point of view, it would be nearly impossible to select this as a new site based on the criteria I just mentioned and still remain competitive in the marketplace. So at first we looked at selling the property as zoned industrial. However, we've had virtually no feasible interest on that property in the last 4 years, presumably for some of the same reasons that we've struggled with. So after 4 years of sitting idle, we thought we should focus on another direction. So you fast forward to today, workforce availability is our number one issue in this community, which is led by the lack of affordable housing. We have lost numerous employees because their landlords sold their homes and stopped renting them out, or they increased their rent substantially, making it unaffordable for our employees to stay. We currently have 26 open positions in Sandpoint that we have not been able to fill for over a year. And that represents about 10% of our manufacturing workforce in Sandpoint. These open positions are restricting our production and preventing us from servicing our customers for the very first time. We simply have more orders than we have the ability to produce, not based on equipment, but based on the people to produce the goods. So you just have to look around, as you all know, and Jeremy talked about, our restaurants and service industries are also struggling finding quality staff. Several are closing because they can't find enough staff to stay open. So I would say we are in a housing crisis. I've been asked, does that mean that Lighthouse and others are not paying a solid wage to afford housing in this community? And I can only speak for Lighthouse, but in the last 14 months, Lighthouse has increased our entry-level wages by nearly 30%. We're now paying $17 an hour starting for every position in the company for day shift and $20 an hour for afternoon and night shifts. With experience and promotions, that rate increases sharply. In addition, we certainly have many positions that are not considered entry level that are starting well above those marks, and we still can't get fully staffed. Inflation is certainly real right now, and we've had to increase our prices to the consumer to pay for the increased labor. So if you haven't noticed, your jar of salad dressing is more expensive on the shelf today than it was 6 months ago. But from a competitive position, we can't raise prices as quickly as the labor rates or the housing costs are increasing, or we will lose business and market share, something we've worked for 60 years to gain. So therefore, we need solutions. We recognize that this rezone request and project will not solve the affordable housing issues in Sandpoint, but we believe it can be one step along the way. We don't believe there's a silver bullet that's going to solve this issue overnight, but a number of smaller actions that will contribute to the solution. Lighthouse is certainly not a housing developer, and we do not want to be in that business. We have our hands full making salad dressing and making the investments in our facilities. So that's why we're looking to sell the property to a developer that can provide multifamily housing to the community and begin to close this gap. So what happens if the affordable housing situation is not resolved? Housing will continue to rise, availability will continue to shrink, and we are unable to operate here without enough employees. So I want to be clear, I'm not here to threaten any action by Lighthouse, but we are undergoing contingency planning as we speak to determine what are we going to do if we can't hire enough employees. Because if we can't find enough employees here, we will have to begin shifting some production from this location to our other facilities out of state. Not because we want to, but because we would have to in order to service the customer. We have seen it happen to Thorne, and we've seen it happen to UNICEF already, where their lack of employees, led by availability and affordability, has forced them to shift some, if not all, of their production outside of our community. You've seen the support letters from the CEO of Bonner General and the superintendent of the public schools. With Lighthouse, that's 3 of the top employers in this community that support this initiative. So finally, as Jeremy referenced in the developer agreement, we oppose the addition of this agreement. We believe that the multifamily rezone will allow the developer to create the proper balance for housing needs in our community as the zone was designed. We've been working on this project for over a year, and this is where we're at. So by providing the requirement of additional developer agreement, it will only extend the timeline and may make the property unmarketable, ultimately defeating the purpose we set out to help resolve. So I want to thank you for your time, and we'll take questions.
Thank you, Kelly. Council, any questions for the applicant? Yeah, go
Mr.
ahead.
Mayor, I'd like to invite legal counsel or staff with that report. Is there any concerns with that report or possibly differences that we might have as a city
We can address them.
that you'd like to address? Just inviting you guys the opportunity.
I think we can address at the end. Let's let them
Perfect.
finish with
Okay.
their presentation and we can address.
Oh, I thought he was done. I'm sorry.
One last thing, I just want to address some of the public comment that was out there. There was one about traffic, and in your staff report, we went to the time and the expense, anticipating that would be a question, to have an analysis done. And if you saw it, that analysis shows that at build out under the current zoning as industrial, the traffic could potentially be far greater than what would occur at a fairly high density of residential. So I just wanted to bring that up, that we have looked at that. And again, any questions you have, we'll be back for any rebuttal to public comment, but, and then Cliff Mort is here as well, if you have questions for him at this time.
Thank you. Council, any questions for the applicant?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So then are you intimating that this housing development will be low to moderate income? Because in the goal H1, and you highlighted it, it says we specifically encourage low to moderate income housing. So are you intimating that this is what is going to happen? I'm confused by the fact that we lump everything into affordable housing, and we know clearly there's two tracks. There's the middle housing for the corporations who are looking for employees, and our service industry. That's a completely different bailiwick of individuals. And so I'm concerned, again, when developers come up, $400,000 is not, I mean, I couldn't afford to live in a $400,000 house. I don't live in a $400,000 house. So I want, and also, is the intent of Lighthouse for this to be workforce housing?
Councilwoman, I would say we can have Mr. Mort speak to the type of housing he intends to construct on this if this is approved. There's a process for that. Right now, my perspective is the housing market is a supply and demand thing. And you look at adding new units on the market. Mr. Mort has constructed multifamily housing throughout the region. And if you don't mind, Cliff, would you mind just speaking to the pricing that you're seeing out there? And
Well, I'm concerned we are losing our service industry. And just a side note, those two restaurants that you mentioned, housing is not their main reason why they're going out of business. And I also think that, this is something that we're experiencing nationwide, where we can't get employees. And so I'm just concerned when I hear everybody say, as Councilman Rule said once before, when everybody say affordable housing, because I'm an advocate for those low income people. If we're going to become a bedroom community if we don't have those houses. And so far, I've not seen anything that a server or somebody who works retail can afford. I mean, if we sold our house in South Sandpoint, we'd make a lot of money, but we'd never be able to live here. We'd have to move. And so I'm really concerned about exactly what we need. I'm tired of circular conversation. I want to know exactly what type of housing and who can afford those houses in this myriad of housing that we have coming up.
Yep. And let Cliff speak. I'll also just jump in there. Idaho code has some limitations, and Darren can speak to this as well. In a rezone, in a comp plan change, you can't do these conditional. We can't show you the project we're going to build and say we're going to build that. You can't make it contingent on us doing something. At this point, the application's for multifamily zoning. And Cliff, do you want to, can you speak to some of the events or?
Yes, that's not necessarily needed. I'm Cliff Mort, for the record, and we've been doing this about 35 years. I think we've spoke a little bit about that. And as Jeremy mentioned, I mean, I would love nothing more than to bring in some plans right now and show you some of the product types and so forth that we're looking at. But I can just tell you, based upon our experience and things that we've done in other markets, we can address some of those needs that you're talking about. We can't go out and do a bunch of subsidy but we can have a variety of product mixes that will meet a lot of the needs that you're talking about. And we plan on doing that. And that can be done in various different types of product types. One, for example, that we're seeing kind of a real new trend, even in the Spokane Valley, is with some studio apartments, building a bigger building with some studios that meet the needs of a lot of those workers that we're talking about. When you start talking about, like even some of the subsidy housing that you had mentioned, it doesn't meet the needs of a lot of those folks as we talked about. But when you're looking at affordability and in the region, we participate in several different markets. We're in about 7 different jurisdictions here locally, and then we have a division in the Tri-Cities, and we do stuff in the Spokane Valley, and in each of those markets we have apartments, and we also have duplexes, we have twin homes, a variety of different product types. And I think when you can cluster homes and have them more in an area and then have some open space with it, those are all real good things as well. And so I think looking at it, really in Sandpoint, you really only have 2 zones. I mean, you have your multifamily zone, and then you have your residential zones. And there's really some things that I think need to be addressed in the code. And I know I brought this up at other meetings, and we're not going to solve it tonight, but I think over time you need to really look at your ordinances and what's allowed in those ordinances and types of housing and so forth, because I think there's some real things that could help, in the overall affordability. And some of the things that, I saw with that too, is just even with some of the housing that we're currently building, right now to find a house under 400,000, as you mentioned, really difficult out there. It's really difficult to produce. It's difficult to take land at the current values that are out there that people are asking for it, go through all the process, go through all the risk of it, add all of the components that are necessary code wise, and to produce a lot under $100,000 these days is very difficult. So then you add sticks and bricks to all of that, and everything that has gone up in value or up in price. And, it's just real difficult to do that. However, interest rates have helped with that, because I think you can compare a $400,000 house today and you're under $2,000 a month in a mortgage. So when you're comparing that to a lot of the apartments up and down the corridor of Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls and Rathdrum, real difficult to find a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment, certainly a 3-bedroom, 2-bath that's under $2,000. But a 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment in that 16 to 1,800 range, that's pretty common. That's pretty average. There are some that you're seeing down, below that 1,400 a month, but pretty difficult to produce it, brand new, with all the requirements that are required to actually build those these days, difficult to do. But hopefully that answers some of the questions. But I do think that, the rezone here and with what could be done with this property, I think it does really a shot in the arm for the community, and certainly we want to help provide that product.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kate, for bringing that point up. I just wanted to have a point of clarification, and maybe Mr. Pryor or Mr. Mort can speak to this, but Mr. Pryor made a very eloquent argument that 10% of his workforce is missing for Lighthouse, and that this is causing a cascading effect where they may have to move production, which is a very significant issue for Sandpoint. So I haven't heard tonight that Lighthouse has any kind of agreement with yourself as the developer to fill that gap and to provide workforce housing for their workforce. So we can talk all night long about we don't have enough affordable housing in city of Sandpoint, and that's true, and nobody is arguing that. But I would like to hear that point of clarification. And also one other point, you just mentioned, it's hard to find a rental for less than 2,000 a month. And so it's a deal to be able to buy and have a mortgage for less than 2,000 a month. And I heard from Mr. Pryor that they're hiring at $17 an hour, for manufacturing. And of course, more than that for higher level positions, but that seems like that's really unattainable. So if you could speak to any of that, I would appreciate it.
Sure, I think the intent of an entry-level wage is not for the purchase of a home for your entire family. It's a process that we all went through and started small and built up as we worked and got more experience. And that's what our organization provides is career development. So, but the apartments, the housing that does start at the lower end is what's in alignment with what our employees need. And we have not, we've had a lot of conversations in terms of workforce development housing, but I can tell you, as I mentioned in the statement, we're not developers. We don't want to be developers. We don't want to be landlords. We think that it can be very unhealthy to employ all day and basically employ at night and create that community. So we have not been interested in building out that. In addition to, capital investments for us, I have today 4 to 5 times the capital request than I have funds to support the business growth of our operation outside of trying to invest in our own housing. We're investing in childcare to supplement our employees' needs. I just don't have the funds to do it all and solve all those issues. So, I think one of the solutions, and I said this is a multi-step process, is having more inventory that's accessible to the types of employee owners that we have, and that's at the entry level all the way through the corporate office.
Thank you for the clarification. I was just one more point. So I completely appreciate your point of not wanting to be a landlord, and that's not your job. And I commend you for providing childcare support. That's very, very considerate and important for your workers. I'm just concerned that you're looking to sell this piece of property to a developer with a high emphasis of concern of providing, filling that gap, providing that solution for workforce housing essentially for your employees, but there's no kind of agreement between you and the developer that your employees will benefit from it. And so I'm not asking you to respond to that question. You certainly can if you would like. I just wanted to be completely clear on that point.
Yeah, I would say, Councilwoman, for sure, there is no agreement there. There is no guarantee that our employees would have access to what is developed on that property. I completely understand that. As a business owner and leader in the community, we believe that we need more inventory. And so that's the primary reason for driving this. And more inventory will help manage those costs, which will only benefit our employees in the long run.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
I would like to thank you for your honesty that you do have no agreement and you do not know ultimately if change the outcome for your own employees. I thank you for that.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I have the utmost respect for all of you guys, and we're here. This is very difficult for all of us. I see life one way. We all see life one way, maybe different, maybe the same sometimes, but absolutely need more inventory. But a question, and the problem is this is all speculation. Inventory for who? I do my own research. I don't know everything, but what I do know is Sandpoint's a great place to live. We have a ski resort. We have a big lake. And for those of us who lived here for a long time, I think we take that for granted sometimes. And the people who are trying to move here, they realize what we have. So the inventory that I see from my perspective is not going to be for your workforce housing. We're low staff at our restaurant. It has nothing to do with the housing market. Ms. Kelly, you brought up a good point. Quality staff, right? Sometimes quality is the hard part. Not everybody wants to work anymore, especially when for a while we're given some, needed funds. But my concern is this inventory is not for people that work at our restaurant or Trinity's or Lighthouse. The inventory is going to be for those who have a lot more money than us. And that's totally fine. That's the life that, they were given or they worked hard for, and they have every right to ask $100,000, ask more than asking price. Mr. Moore, you have every right to sell your house for $1 million. If each one sold for $1 million, that is your right if we were to move forward. So my concern is the inventory, from what I research and what I see, is not going to be for the layman, for the normal worker. It's going to be for the long list of people with a lot of money who are waiting to eat up cheaper homes for them. So usually subsidy or density, from what I understand, is the solution. Density in a community like ours, in a condition that we're in right now in America, the density is going to allow cheaper housing, which we have no idea how much cheaper, right? What, from 600,000 to what, 400,000? I mean, let's be realistic here. That's going to be cheaper housing. Again, I don't believe, from my perspective and my research, for us, it's going to be for somebody else that has a lot more money, and that's completely fine. That's the world we live in. So that is a concern of mine. The other concern is, it's like everybody's leaving because of housing. I haven't met a person yet, and it doesn't mean I'm right. I have not met a person yet to move because they couldn't afford a house here. And if everybody's leaving Sandpoint, then why is this a national issue? I was in Coeur d'Alene with my kids for Halloween and went to McDonald's because they're really hungry. 2 employees, so only the drive-through, and my kids didn't eat their burger because they made it wrong because they were short-staffed. So where's everybody going, and where are they working, and where are they living if this is a national issue? I'm not asking you to answer this. I'm just saying this is all speculation, and density is going to allow cheaper housing. I don't believe for the workforce. It's going to allow cheaper housing for those who may have a lot more money who are waiting to move here, which they have every right to. Those are just some thoughts that I had. And also with inflation, right? Somebody buys a house, they work at Lighthouse, they work at our restaurant, they're able to buy a house for $350,000. Cost of living goes up. Our wages can't keep up with inflation. CPI says it's 5%. It's probably realistically 14%. They don't want to tell you the truth. So we buy a house. Finally, we made it. We save all our pennies. We buy a home. And then the cost of living goes up. And then now okay, do we do our mortgage? Now we have to do this, all of this. And so the writing's in the sand, in my opinion. And this is, again, a very difficult situation. Has nothing to do with intentions of you guys up here. It has to do with my perspective of reality from my perspective. And this is very difficult. I appreciate you hearing me out and your time. I really do.
I'm trying to eke out the question there.
Yeah, there is no
Councilman,
question.
And I think the question is, what guarantee is this going to be? And there's no guarantee. What I can tell you is, if the intent were to build, high-end homes, single-family detached, the request would be for single-family zoning.
Okay.
The request is for multifamily zoning because of the density that allows. You can look at the site and understand it and know that it's bound by, a railroad track on the side, like many communities in Sandpoint and neighborhoods. High-end housing in Sandpoint is probably going to be on the lake, waterfront, probably single-family detached. I mean, I believe in markets. I look at these numbers that we issued 0 building permits for new homes in October and 26 year to date. And I say there's an imbalance in the market and we need to add supply. And as I tried to express, the supply that's in the pipeline takes a heck of a long time and not all of it's going to get built. So here's a project where the first step is to rezone it so somebody can get after it. So.
Yep, Mr. Mayor. So your concern is there's 0 single-family homes, but what is there more of being built?
That's the problem.
Okay.
There's U of I, there's one house
Mhm.
on that thing, a year and a half.
And this, if approved, is going to be a lot faster, I'm assuming from,
Got
it
an
sounds like you're really concerned, so it'd be a lot faster building going on.
We can only control and bring the applications to the city.
Yeah, but you can't guarantee that these are going to be built a lot faster than the U of I.
No, that's your job.
Mhm. But you have enough workforce and everybody to build these things right away.
I defer to Mr. Mort on this one, but
Okay.
my point is it's a supply imbalance, which
Mhm.
drives pricing. And
Right.
the request is to ask for zoning that would allow higher density construction and higher density residential development on the site.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, like the townhouses that were built by Goodwill, they're $2,400 a month. I mean, that's ridiculous, $2,300 to $2,400 a month. We thought that that was going to be housing that would be somewhat affordable. Again, that's a subjective word. And 2, I am not talking about subsidized housing. In my opinion, subsidized housing creates despair. It creates, I had a business owner here, wanted to give an employee a raise and the employee said, please don't, I'll lose my housing. So there's no encouragement for them to do better. It's just to stay the same. So I don't want you to think that that's what we're talking about. We're talking to try to find a situation for these low wage earners, how we can keep them, because quite frankly, I'm too old to go out and wait tables. And that's what's going to happen. It happened in Sun Valley. Was when I was in Sun Valley, everybody is coming out of retirement to do the work. And that's not good either. And everybody who's moving here, it seems like, are retirees. So, and I know it's a difficult solution, but I just feel that I need to speak out for those who don't have a voice. And they can't afford a place to live, and that's sad.
I hear you. And this is the time for questions. I think your question is, what guarantee or what are we going to do? The point here is let the market work. Let the market work, get out of the way. The market will respond to the demand. Hopefully you may even get too much housing, which would really drive prices down.
Capitalism.
So the market works, let it work. And that's the guarantee that we can put forward. The developer has stated he is going to build multifamily if this gets rezoned. And that's a whole nother process that we'll be back in front of you for.
Counselor, any other questions for the applicant?
No, I'm not going to go there.
Okay, thank you both. Appreciate that, all of you. Okay. So we're now going to proceed to the public hearing if there's no further questions for the applicant at this time. So for the record, any written comments received prior to agenda posting were included in the meeting packet or otherwise provided to council. Please note that the public hearing is for comments only. Do not address any questions to the council or myself or to city staff. If council members have questions for a person testifying, they should ask those questions at the time of their testimony. For those in attendance here in chambers this evening, if you'd like to speak, you'll need to complete a sign-up form at the front of the room. Sorry, back by the door, and hand it to the city clerk up front. Please state on your form whether you wish to speak in favor, are neutral, or in opposition of this request. Do not approach the dais. If you have any written materials for council, please hand those to the city clerk. For those participating on Zoom, please note that you'll need a working microphone on your phone or computer to speak. When your name is called, you will see a prompt on your screen asking whether you would like to unmute. Then you will need to unmute yourself in order to be heard. The clerk will now lower all hands on Zoom in order to take testimony in the order previously stated. If you wish to speak in favor, are neutral, or are in opposition, I will make a call for each. Then you may raise your hand at that time. Each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes. The public hearing is now open. Is there anyone who would like to testify in favor of the proposal of the application?
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
Teague Mullen.
Okay.
Thank you, council members and mayor. My name is Teague Mullen. I own Realm Partners in Sandpoint. I've been a real estate agent here for 17 years. Really what I want to speak to is pretty much the industrial zone. Obviously we've had this property listed for 4 years, and we've had some interest and over the 17 years that I've been in Sandpoint selling real estate, the biggest challenge for us is like having people come in and want to buy property and live here because it's a great place to live with the lake and the ski hill, and they want to start their companies here and manufacture here. And it's a great, idea that, great, we have great schools, we're going to raise our families here. It's going to be a great situation. But when they get here and realize, like, here's my needs, Teague, I want, $1 million property, manufactured 10,000 square feet. They get here and it doesn't exist. Property values have gone up so high. Well, actually, property values have always been up so high in Sandpoint in the industrial zone that we can't compete with Post Falls. We can't compete with Spokane. They're selling dirt down there for $1 a foot. They have workforce, they have housing for their workforce. So even if you have the dream to come here and manufacture, it's not feasible financially to buy a piece of land and to do it. And then to find the employees to run it. So, I mean, this property, I mean, it comes down to, it's like, do we want to have this industrial zone and have it sit there for another 10 years undeveloped? I mean, Kelly, they bought it in 2005. You know, are we going to wait another 10 years hoping that somebody's going to come and have all the money in the world to purchase it and develop it, to have the same problem that we have currently with no housing for our workforce? So for me, to tie the hands of this property into the industrial zone doesn't make much sense. I mean, Ponderay is actually more proactive than Sandpoint is in, getting companies to move in. I mean, when was the last company that moved into Sandpoint? When was the last company? Can anyone say when a new company came to Sandpoint and start manufacturing? I don't know. I can't think of one. So that being said, I really feel that, this property, even though, it's going to a multifamily zone, is going to be the best for our community. It's going to be best for, it's not going to solve the problems that we have for affordable housing, because I see it, we started building homes with Mort that were starting at 185 in Spring Creek. Those, those went to dual income families that were, working for Lighthouse. Those days are gone. Building costs are up high. U of I properties they're trying to sell lots there for $200,000. How can you build a house on one of those lots and be affordable? The only way that we're going to be able to be.
Mr. Mayor, that is 3 minutes.
Thank you. You can finish your sentence.
The only way that we're going to be able to be more affordable for housing is density and multifamily.
Thank you for those comments. Appreciate it. Madam Clerk?
I'm not aware of anyone else who would like to speak in support, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, one more chance to let anyone raise their hand online. Oh, we've got one here in the audience. Please come forward.
Mr. Mayor, Council, Jason Welker, 311 Huron Avenue, Chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission. We recommended approval of this rezone, and I stand by that. I believe it's essential that we provide more housing for this community. We also recommended a development agreement be included in this rezone. I am all for the market solving our housing crisis, but it's you guys who make the rules that determine the field on which that market game unfolds. I would love to ask Mr. Pryor. You had some great questions from the council up here. How can we be sure that this housing is available for workers in the economy? Two things. Density is going to be important, but under current zoning regulations for multifamily, there's absolutely nothing stopping a development proposal coming before you for single family homes on this property. So I think Jeremy pointed out one possible solution here that we could discuss between P and Z Council, and that's changing one letter in our city code from P to C, permitted use to conditional use. Secondly, one of the solutions I believe the Workforce Housing Task Force has discussed is deed restricted housing. I think that's something that should be discussed in this development, is some proportion of these homes being guaranteed to be available specifically for workers in the local economy. Yes, that will probably reduce the marketable sales price of this property, but that's it's not a subsidy because it wouldn't be coming from the government. But if Lighthouse were to sell this property for slightly less than they could without any sort of development agreement, we could consider that Lighthouse's contribution towards providing housing for their own workers in the future. So I urge you once again to consider either tabling this decision and discussing with planning and zoning the possibility of an amendment to city code that would prevent single family homes from being put on this property without any conditional use permit, or even better, the discussion of a potential development agreement for this property. Thank you. And again, like I said in the P&Z meeting, this is one of the last largest developable properties in Sandpoint. We want to make sure we get this right. So I know there's an urgency from both employers and developers to get these homes up as quickly as possible. But what kind of homes are they going to be and who are they going to be for? That's the question we still need to figure out. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Anyone else in favor of the application? Okay. Is there anyone who would like to testify who is neutral? Seeing none. Is there anyone who would like to testify who is opposed?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
Halden Gates.
Heldon Gates, I live in the city and I apologize. I have a few different thoughts, so I'll try and keep them as organized as possible. But to clarify, I'm not speaking on behalf of Tamarack Aerospace employer, but I am speaking from the perspective of being employed at Tamarack Aerospace Group. First of all, the concern that a multifamily development may be proposed and then changed into a single family development is not academic. That has happened. The Moss Hart development behind Nicholas Way, for example, was originally proposed as a PUD that had high density housing and was ultimately built as tract homes, single family homes that take up most of the lot that have caused a number of other problems. Generally speaking, if somebody tells you, don't make me promise to do the right thing, it means they're planning not to. So I would be very concerned about approving this without a development agreement that holds the developer to actually providing the multifamily high density housing that everyone keeps saying is necessary for continued growth. On the airport side of things, the airport receives federal money, which is contingent on the airport being operated in a way that is compatible with safe aviation use. That does not just include not blocking navigation signals, that also includes the area around it, which is why we have approach zones and lateral safe zones. We have in the past lost FAA funding, for example, Silver Wing development, which was a real problem. And it's the reason why some of the facilities for a long time were substandard and needed to be repaired, the runway in particular. If we start talking about uses that are incompatible near the airport, the airports that come to mind, in addition to Colorado, are Santa Monica and Hampton, both of which have been under attack for a long time and are facing closure. Both of those airports are important to the communities and are essentially being shut down by developments that have come in to an existing airport. And with that said, this airport is important to our community. We have a very active training community at the airport. Ken Larson does quite a bit of good work with the high school, and a number of other flight instructors operate out of there. Timberline, Dyer, Tamarack Aerospace Group all operate manufacturing out of that airport. And so if we start thinking about uses that may threaten the future of the airport and these manufacturing jobs that are currently provided at the airport, then we need to be very careful about not trading one problem for another problem in the future. I'd also point out that the Timberline property that was specifically in the presentation is currently being developed for an expansion of Timberline, to the best of my knowledge. So it is not going to remain vacant very long. And I know that Dyer and Tamarack are both working on new projects, which may down the line require expansion.
Mr. Mayor, that is 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Appreciate those comments. Is there anyone else who would like to speak who's opposed to the application? Okay, please come forward. Please, yeah.
Well, I'm opposed to some things and in favor of others. Okay.
Nice.
Oh, please state your name and whether or not you reside in the city for the record, please.
My name is Kent Player. My wife and I have lived here for 6 months. We bought a home from Teague down there, and I live across the street from the concerned property, literally across the street. Well, and across the railroad tracks too. There can't deny the railroad. We moved up here from Salt Lake City area. We lived in Draper. I served on the Draper Planning Commission for 15 years. And we saw Draper grow from about 8,000 to about 60,000 people in the time we lived there. So all the issues you're talking about, we saw in spades. One of the issues that we dealt with that was kind of a burr to me was the development agreement issue. It seemed to me that the development agreement, although it has some benefits, it seemed to cause more problems in trying to finagle it and work it all out than it was worth. So I would say no to the development agreement. However, I am in favor of housing that people can live in. And I don't think there's a way possible to make it available for everyone. So you just let the market do what it can. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Player. Is there anyone else who would like to comment that is opposed?
Mr. Mayor, Dave Shook.
Mayor, council members, one of the downsides of probably being the last speaker is that everybody took all your talking points already. I'd like to commend staff. Their report, I read it, was very good. It addressed most of the considerations that I would have brought to you. And, city planner's report was very well, did that as well. My concern here tonight would be, and I think it's been expressed from both sides, that changing this zoning will not solve the housing problem that we have here. It's that simple. The airport is an industrial area and it has noisy and hazards. And having industrial zoning around it as a buffer around it to the residential community and the rest of the city is very important. And I would urge you not to change that for a problem that may be being solved already with the pipeline that we saw. So we're going to have an issue in the future years with the need for industrial land around the airport. And we may be just creating another problem down the road by making that zone change tonight. Any questions for me?
No.
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. I see you're wearing a Tahir jacket, so I'm going to ask you a question about that. So we already heard just a few minutes ago from another individual that is employed in the industrial zone by the airport that their company has plans to expand. And I'm just curious if your company that you are affiliated with has plans to expand.
I'm not speaking for Dyer tonight. But when Dyer purchased Quest Aircraft, they purchased it with the idea that it was a manufacturing toehold in North America. It happened to be an airplane company, which is beneficial to them as well, but they're looking for a manufacturing toehold in North America. We're currently underway. We have a $2 million expansion to our facilities now. And there are more plans for expansion of manufacturing here. And that's all I can go into.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the speaker?
Thank you for representing. That was what I needed. I needed to hear from someone around the airport. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Show. Appreciate it.
I think we've got another individual in the back.
Okay, please come forward. And this is for speaking opposed to the application? Okay, thank you.
My name is Rick Bost. I live in Bonner County. I don't live in the city of Sandpoint. I do currently own 3 of the lots that adjoin this parcel directly to the east and inside the airport boundary. Of the boundary that abuts to Omni Park, I own 660 feet of frontage to this property. What I have not heard tonight addressed is the issue of noise. All of those lots in Omni Park are, I can promise you, will be hangars for airplanes that are coming in here. And directly across the fence from me, if there's apartments there, then, when I fly in at 3 o'clock in the morning, there's nothing but a chain link fence there. If I build a helipad on one of my lots and I land a helicopter there, those people in that community are not going to like that. All my adult life, I've been involved in aviation. When I was a young man in Atlanta, Georgia, I went to flight school that had the exact same problem, that a parcel of land was rezoned from industrial and it was rezoned for one neighborhood. That one neighborhood gave me so many headaches at 28 years old and trying to make a living working a flight school. not only at my front door complaining about the noise, because we were the obvious target, right? We had the airplanes in the pattern, but also with the FAA and also with the county that I resided in. So almost the exact same situation with a rapidly growing area. I do understand the need for housing. None of us want to see this turn into Jackson or Sun Valley. But we need to consider the limitations of noise coming from my side of the fence to that side of the fence. So any questions?
Any questions for the speaker?
Appreciate that perspective. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Bost. Any other speakers, anyone else who would like to speak opposed to the application? Madam Clerk,
No, Mr. Mayor.
going once, going twice. All right, Mr. Graham, you'd like to rebut?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Again, really appreciate your time tonight, your deliberation. Just a couple elements to rebut here. I guess I'll start with this issue of noise. Sandpoint is not a quiet place. If you live near a train track or a train crossing, or if you're one of the hundreds of homes around the airport, it's not a quiet place. We all know that. And the way we've addressed that, every other subdivision on the north side is to put a plat condition on it. And that plat condition, if you're not familiar, Darren can tell you about it. It states that, you live next to an airport, there's going to be dust and noise and aircraft operations. You are buying or there knowing that. And we would expect that of any future subdivision of this property or development of the property, that condition to be placed on the plat. The second issue that was brought up was, the quasi threat to airport operations. This is not in the airport. If it were, it would be owned by the county maybe, or the city or the airport. It's not in the lateral safety zone. This is very similar to many other subdivisions all around the airport. And further, if you look at that traffic analysis, there would be potentially a greater density of human beings with an industrial facility built there than there ever would be with multifamily residential. So that's an FAA issue. I don't get it, but it doesn't seem incompatible to our existing land use around the airport. And I think it's quite apparent it's not in the airport planning area. And then finally, the development agreement. Development agreements are clumsy. They're time consuming. You have a very, very elegant solution to your issues or concerns about single family being developed on this property, which is to simply ask Planning Commission to draft a modification of the multifamily zoning to make single family a conditional use or prohibited use. Development agreements take time to go back and forth to negotiate. There's nothing in Idaho code that allows you to stipulate, dedicated amount of workforce housing or income related housing. There are tax incentives for developers to do that, which is what Mr. Prescott and Whitewater Creek does. So the development agreement is nothing we're interested in, and there is an elegant solution to you to address that concern. And finally, I think we're somewhat lucky to have a developer with the experience of Mr. Mort here to take this project through. He's experienced. He knows what he's talking about. You can see his projects all over. He could be looking at projects in any other community. So with that, thanks for your consideration. Good luck, and we hope that you support this request.
Mr. Grimm. Just a reminder that any new facts that are elicited, the public must be given an opportunity to comment on any new facts. Let me rephrase that. Just a reminder to the council that we're not to bring up information at this point. If you do have any questions, they can be directed to staff. The public hearing is now closed. At this time, the council will deliberate. And again, no new information may be provided. Questions may be directed only to city staff during deliberation. Would council like to make a motion, or I open the floor for deliberation?
Mayor, I think deliberation would be good at this moment and give staff an opportunity to comment if that. I just know in the past we've parked for the horse and haven't been able to ask staff comments because we did a motion. Wanna not lose that opportunity.
I'd like to make a couple points of clarification, Mr. Mayor and councilperson, if I may. You do not have a code change before you tonight. That is not an option for you this evening. I'm not saying that wouldn't be an option in the future. That is not an option for tonight's decision. As you are aware, you have a request for a comp plan amendment. And if you approve that comp plan amendment, then you have a request for a zone change in front of you. With regards to the development agreement and restrictions that have been suggested here tonight, Mr. Grimm is correct. You also have an option to approve both without a development agreement. There has been mention of some deed restrictions, some requirements for workforce housing. I think Darren did a great job in his presentation in articulating that there is not support in Idaho code for that. I would like to go one step further and dive into that just a little bit and remind you that if you attempt to put restrictions on a private property owner tonight through the use of a development agreement beyond what your code allows you to do, you're subjecting the city to an increased risk of a takings claim. And so as you consider and deliberate with regards to some of the commentary you've heard about deed restrictions or development agreements that impose restrictions beyond just the requirement that this actually be built out as a multifamily project as is required by zone, you do subject the city to liability in the future with regards to a takings claim. And if you have any questions on that, I'm happy to answer those now.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
So just to make sure that we're perfectly clear, I understand what you're saying, but what you're saying with respect to a takings, if the council were to suggest or request in terms of a development agreement that, for example, 20% of the homes built must be sold for X price that we consider affordable, that would put us in a position of liability.
That is correct.
Thank you.
And another point of clarification, Wanda, if this were approved, both were approved without conditions or without a development agreement this evening, and I were to direct Planning and Zoning Commission to come forward with a code amendment to make single-family use within the multifamily district a conditional or prohibited use, would that be, would the development or would this applicant be restricted to that new amended code so long as they have not applied for a building permit?
It is the code in place at the time of application for a building permit.
Thank you. Any other, let's hear it, council. Who wants to speak?
Deliberating?
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for everybody that showed up in their presentation. I think that there are some very honest and accurate statements about our situation here in Sandpoint. That the one thing that we can guarantee that time, I believe, is going to tell how this is going to unfold. Because there's been so much information, I'm trying to figure out a way to boil this down into a couple points. And what I hear from both sides is that this will not solve our problem at all. This is really just resolving itself into just a real estate deal, maybe wrapped up in a do-gooder element, but that's all this is. Also, if we are putting the cart before the horse, we are in fact trading one problem for a whole nother set of other problems down the road that if we do our due diligence here tonight and provide that time to be able to, and I've heard this from the rhetoric and the request to look at and thoroughly review our comprehensive plan is obvious. And it is obvious to me that that should be done first, not amendments. Like logically, it does not seem that we should tear something apart, put a few Band-Aids on it, and then move forward. Take the time, allow our staff to take the time to be able to present to us the most reasonable comprehensive plan to move forward for the next 20 years. And let us not forget that we are 6 years into a master plan that this community committed to the airport and its development. How consistent and predictable is that of us to, in a 20-year plan? I know that the master plan for the airport is, we're not bound, but it's there in front of us in a community, and individuals put time and energy into that, that 6 years into it, we make a strong pivot like this. That is, I think it would be respectful to understand that we're not even halfway through that commitment to the airport.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I would like to, I agree with Andy's comments, especially with respect to the fact that we are on the cusp, or the city is on the cusp of revisiting or continuing the revisiting of the comprehensive plan update. This was a process that was started a while ago, was interrupted by COVID, and as far as I understand, is about to be taken back up imminently. It was mentioned early on tonight, or there was a question, I can't remember who asked it, but I heard there hasn't been any studies about our future needs around the airport with respect to industry. And given the lack of those studies, as well as public input, and the fact that this was a plan to move forward all along, I think it would be very premature for us to make a major change to the comprehensive plan, not knowing what our needs are going to be, and one that might have a lot of serious impacts moving forward. So I have concerns with that.
Mr. Mayor, I agree also. First of all, have we had any group, EDC, et cetera, out recruiting for manufacturing companies? I believe it was Commissioner Shook on Planning and Zoning who said, are we going to set precedent? And this is all the land we have. I was quite astounded for industrial when I looked at the map and thought, this is it? And Darren explaining further that really regionally for all our little quad cities, this is kind of the industrial land that we have. And I think too, putting the cart before the horse, I really have issue with changing the comp plan right now, because we are starting to do that. We are starting to look at things. And I would like to direct staff, if I may, in regards to updating the comp plan, that we have these studies done, that we have the 20-year studies, and what is the impact of our airport, because it's a $48 million impact to our economy. And it's just, and I'm afraid for unintended consequences. If we don't look at this thoroughly, then where does that leave us somewhere else down the line?
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yeah.
I want to be clear, at least from my perspective, and I heard Councilman Darling, the word capitalism and free market. And I just want to be clear, at least from this chair, I'm absolutely for that. My father's from Mexico, moved here. We're at where we're at because of the free market and hard work. So there's no problem with that at all. The question at hand is this free market going to be what we want it to be for, and that is the people that work here that have middle income jobs. And that's the question. And as multifamily, like whether it's changed from single family to strictly multifamily, you still got to prove to me that is going to be what's going to fix it. And all these houses in the pipeline, which are very slow, staff is working very hard, and I will protect them unprecedented times. So I got your back, staff. Yeah, let's say these houses in the pipeline are taking forever. What's to say this project's going to be any faster? Let's say it's faster and it's done tomorrow. Then all that's going to do is create more expensive. We still have a density issue, and they're going to be bought up because these other houses aren't being built fast enough for somebody with a lot more money. So again, I hope we don't get confused that free market's great, all for it, but also don't get confused that changing it to multifamily is going to be this fix. So I don't want to get lost in the emotions of this personally, but I also want to protect the free market mentality that I have, that I heard here. We're not, there's no solution here, there's only trade-offs. So the unintended consequences are very important to think about. And I just want to give my 2 cents there. So.
Well, I think I appreciate Kelly's intimate letting us know the intimacy of Lighthouse's workforce and their situation. I think you have to almost break, there's so much going on in this complex situation is you can't look past all the facts that one Lighthouse, who's a great ambassador, is a manufacturer for the city of Sandpoint. You know, they've got a piece of property that's, it's funny, it's ironically exactly what the city just dealt with our wastewater treatment facility. We had a piece of property and we thought that we needed to relocate to make it big and better. And our engineers told us no, that, 20 years later or 10 years later, that no, that was sufficient with technology, which I'm guessing is probably the same situation with Lighthouse. So now they got a piece of property that's sitting there. It's not being sold. They think it's speculative. Who knows what they're willing to sell this piece of property for? Maybe that's the answer to the affordable housing concept. It's not disclosed. I don't think that it's relevant that it be disclosed, but that may be a great opportunity that a private partnership through a developer could create an affordable piece of dirt that maybe without an agreement could be an opportunity for their employees. I can tell you as a business owner, the last thing that I would ever get into is building housing specifically for my employees. One, I put them in a house, they don't work out. It's a worst case scenario to have something on paper with an employee in housing, but creating a housing for our employees is the absolute number one focus. Employee retention and housing for employees is important. I think density is the solution. I think capitalism, market share of creating more is going to help solve this problem. That's all. The airport layover is super important. I know the importance of it to our community, but I do question with all the residential around this particular piece of property that, with a simple code change, we could make this work out and delay 6 to 12 months worth of delay for a project such as this. It's the largest piece of property, like planning and zoning representative said. I think it does need to be done right. And with that code change, which would trigger a special use permit, thank you, could answer everything. So you guys could, it won't be me sitting here doing that, it'll be you guys, but it could define exactly what that property is. And I think that's exactly what needs to go on here, is a multifaceted project with all sorts of layers. And I think this property is in a great spot, and specifically would be a great opportunity for a great problem solver for our community.
Councilwoman?
Guess I'm last. I'm going to be very short. I believe we had a meeting where we, probably back in April, when maybe one of the first times we met, Darren, I can't recall. But we talked about code being changed in places and it messes up where it's supposed to form with another thing, and unintended consequences of a lot of code change. And so, having come from the Planning Commission, yes, somebody's talking about a single letter or we're talking about different things. I'm concerned we need to go back, adjust our code, fix all the problems that we have that do not fit with the comprehensive plan that we currently have. Yes, we need to update the comprehensive plan, but we, at least in this time frame, need to fix the code to match the current comprehensive plan, then move on with the comprehensive plan, so that when the member of the public comes to tell you what they want in their comprehensive plan, they don't realize multifamily means single family too. I can guarantee you that the majority of the population does not get that. That's my biggest concern here. I think that there is this great urgency. I don't think we're going to solve the problem tonight. What I would really like to see us, and I would like to request to the mayor, is that we get on to changing the code, and not one letter. We change it so it makes sense. Then we progress to change our comprehensive plan. And then we won't be sitting up here having these 4-hour council meetings, because all the pieces of the puzzle will be sitting there for us, and it will be a lot easier to connect them together. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Shannon.
that's my final point. I understand everyone's opinions and point about the necessity of changing the code. And as Fonda mentioned, that's not before us tonight. So I won't belabor the point, but even requiring in a development agreement, multifamily housing or requiring it in code so that it's very spelled out is not going to solve the problem. We were just talking about capitalism and what the market can bear and let the market fix the problem. And so I can guarantee you that there are people that want to move to Sandpoint so desperately that if you build multifamily housing by the airport, they will pay an excessive amount of money for it. So I'm a little bit weary of the conversation about multifamily housing, and it's like this, I can't square it up in my brain about like, if you build multifamily housing, it's going to solve the problem and then let the market play out. Those are two different things. And so I just have a problem with that. And those two arguments can't solve the same problem. The market playing out and building multifamily housing are two, they're just not going to solve the problem together.
I just would like to concur that just because I want to change code and make it work with our comprehensive plan, that I agree with all those statements. I think the market has proven if our goal for our public, we're trying to support what we're hearing and the cries that we're hearing for housing, for school employees, et cetera. Don't have to reiterate that. We have to come up with better solutions. I'm assuming that's what the mayor's task force is. I'm looking forward to seeing some written solutions and things we can talk about. I feel uncomfortable rushing down this path and thinking that it's going to solve a problem.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Motion for at that point.
Yes, you may.
I move the Sandpoint City Council, after consideration of the criteria and relevant standards of Idaho Code and Sandpoint City Code, recommend that Sandpoint City Council deny the request by the Lighthouse Incorporation for a comprehensive plan map amendment to redesignate the property known as parcel hashtag or dash number RPS 000001036058 located in section 10. Township 57 North, Range 2, west from industrial to context area 3. The reason for this decisions are: the city council has committed itself to a database decision-making. This is reflected in our adopted strategic plan and consistent with our overall approach to legislative oversight of the city. The city has not conducted a recent land use study that informs us how much industrial versus commercial versus residential land is needed in the city limits in the next 20 years, especially given the unprecedented growth due to the pandemic. This will occur as part of our comprehensive plan update within the next year, as we've heard tonight. Furthermore, the applicant has not provided sufficient evidence specifically relevant to Sandpoint that demonstrates the need for more land for residential development outweighs the need for industrial land in proximity to the airport and in our city limits. There is undeniable a current need for more housing, but that current need must be balanced with the need for land for industry growth and expansion. The examples provided by the applicant are larger cities with a much larger and mature industrial sector that is in a state of decline. We are fortunate to have a growing manufacturing business in Sandpoint. Two examples are, as we heard tonight, the Air or Kodiak and Timberline helicopters. Both have plans to increase their industrial capacity in the near future, from what I heard tonight. The city's current comprehensive plan was adopted with a long-range community vision that included the compatibility of land uses. There is a clean line of separation of Woodland Drive between residential land uses and industrial land uses, as we heard tonight. The applicant proposes redrawing the line, allowing the residential encroachment into industrial uses that are vital for the long-term health of the city. It's not an easy motion, but that's where I stand tonight.
I second. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Councilman Darling,
No.
Councilwoman Sherman,
Yes.
Councilwoman McAllister,
Yes.
Councilwoman Rule,
I would like to make a statement that I will openly apologize to our planning commission. I rarely vote against their recommendations, but I feel like we can slow this down and do a better job. So I will vote yes.
Councilman Groot,
Yes.
Councilman Sprow,
Yes.
Okay, the application is denied. The final item on the.
No,
agenda-
Mr. Mayor,
we have a
that
second.
was the
Oh.
application for the comp plan amendment that was denied because now your application for rezone is inconsistent with
Okay.
your comp plan. You need a second
So,
motion.
wait a minute.
Your second vote is the application for the rezone.
I'll make a motion for that since it's
Okay.
connection.
I thought we didn't have to do that one if we.
No, it's.
You
You have
still
a
do.
different reason for
Oh,
denying now
okay.
that the
Right.
first one
Okay.
was denied.
So I move that Sandpoint City Council, have consideration of the criteria and relevant standards of Idaho Code and Sandpoint City Code, recommend that Sandpoint City Council deny the request by Lighthouse Inc. for a zone change on property known as parcel number RPS 00000103605A, located in section 10, township 57 north, range 2, west from industrial general to residential multifamily. The reason for this decision is the request is not in compliance with the future land use map of the current adopted comprehensive plan.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Councilman Sprow,
Yes.
Councilman Groot,
Yes.
Councilwoman Rule,
We're moving to deny, right?
Correct.
Okay, it's late, sorry. Yes.
Councilwoman McAllister,
Yes.
Councilwoman Sherman,
Yes.
Councilman Darling.
No.
Motion passes. The next item on the agenda, staff seeks approval to finalize 95% construction documents and advertise for bids for the remodel of the police department offices. City Administrator Jennifer Stapleton and Police Chief Corey Kuhn will provide a presentation for us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Council will be most excited to know I have little to say on that. It's contained in the staff report. And I have the chief coming up to the front.
But the chief happens to have a lot to say.
I too have very little to say. Except for we are excited in the police department to be moving forward with the remodel. I think each and every one of you have had the opportunity to walk through our department before, see the maze, see the confusion. We've had some odor issues in the last month with some potential sewage breaks. We've had to move our office staff out of downstairs today because of some smells. So it's critical that we move forward with this. Yes, it was correct. So, but we're excited for the move. We're excited for this adventure. Not so much the moving and relocating and some of that stuff, which will be a little chaotic for not only the police department, but customer service that we're working out. But I would say, I don't know if you guys have any questions. The packet was really well, the maps pretty accurate to what we're looking at accomplishing. So.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I'm going to apologize to everybody, but I have tried to keep this absolutely as short as possible. So I do have some safety concerns. When we remodeled the council chambers, we had an exit door there for those three and an exit door here for these three. Also, not so worried about access to bathroom, although I did need that tonight. Thank you very much. I've always been concerned about the windows. I've never loved the windows, but I've kept my mouth shut about that. I don't like the windows. I don't know who else up here, probably the mayor, has received death threats. Him and I have both sat through some pretty tumultuous meetings. There are other small towns and cities where they have had gunfire in council chambers. I am incredibly, and I don't want to be an alarmist, uncomfortable with closing this door off. And I would like actually there to be future that this door during council is unlocked so that there is an access in and out. And I know you're going to tell me that police department is right there and they can get here, but
No,
that
I'm going to
doesn't
tell you
mean
that's
I
not
can't.
acceptable because we can't, because that's a secure facility. So we don't unlock that door. It's never been unlocked,
It's never been unlocked.
never.
And during council meetings,
Because if I'm not here, then you guys have access to it.
Mhm.
So because of CJIS requirements, we can't leave it unlocked.
so there's no way to even take care of that. And would people come through that door if something were going on in here though?
Probably.
Probably not. So then
Probably,
you're-
probably not. So the loaded question being is like, right now, we have 2 officers on, and if they're out on calls
Mhm.
and I'm not here, they could be coming from anywhere out in the city. So the likelihood of them sitting in the office, I wouldn't guarantee that. I couldn't guarantee that. So.
Okay, so Plan B, Joel, trade me seats. Um,
We'll just
We-
put some
we-
bulletproof glass all around.
We can rotate chairs. Yeah. Yeah, that door's
I
never
will
been
jump
locked.
in front of you.
That's right, but I remember you telling me that then you guys would have access coming in here if
We do
officers
have,
were in
we
there.
do, but we will not under that remodel. So that door goes away. in
Right,
that
I
remodel.
understand that. That's why I'm,
Yeah,
have
they
a
wouldn't, the
concern.
likelihood of them, you walk through that hallway, that's the cleanest that hallway's been in probably 3 years.
I'm not concerned
No,
about that.
They wouldn't have
That-
got through there before because the
Mhm.
amount of storage stuff that was in there.
So this is taking way longer than it needs to. There is no option to make this an entry point for police if we have an emergency in here. It's not an option at all.
No, not in my opinion,
If I
no.
can jump in too, Chief. I knew this question was going to come up and we had discussions with concerns about access here. We had discussions on that door and CJIS requirements with the chief.
Yeah.
We also asked the architects to look about access in the back through the alley so that there could be exit there too. They did do a full review of that, and unfortunately, we can't do that either because of the elevation with this building between coming out the door and the alley, and the fact that the property line actually comes all the way up to the building. So we did look at that. We would have to build something in the alley, but unfortunately, we don't own that property.
Right.
So we did look at that too.
Okay.
Option 3 would be a bulletproof dais.
That's what I was just gonna say.
Well, I know that sounds really silly, but you know, if
It happens
anything
to
ever
me.
happened in this
On the
chambers, it would
council.
be nice to know there was a little bit extra strength
Yes.
to cower.
No, I
I'm not very
appreciate
tall,
that.
but I sure am good.
Wisconsin.
I'm happy to take them both.
They're bad shots anyways.
Yeah, and I understand the fear because I experienced that quite well when and when I campaigned before. So I get the fear, but I trust that the police will take care of us. And Joel and
And Joel.
Andy will throw their body in front of.
Right. Okay. So, moving right along, I just wanted to bring that up. Jennifer probably knew it was coming.
Those
Thank
are,
you.
those, and we have honestly talked about all those concerns.
Mhm. Okay.
And if I may, Jennifer, if you would please, for the edification of the public, please tell them where the funds are coming from.
Thank
So
you for having that question. I know, the public
Right,
doesn't.
We know, yeah.
So we budgeted funds for this project with local dollars. It's carryover capital dollars that we've had from prior years. But in addition to that, we have received ARPA funding. It is COVID-related funding. And so we proposed the use of some of those grant dollars to fund this project, just like what we used in the other portion of City Hall. We have done a complete HVAC replacement here of this building, and it's about getting us into compliance with airflow exchanges for the health and safety of the public, our staff, and our elected officials. And so included in the police remodel would be getting the ducting changed out as needed in police, as well as addressing touchless systems in restrooms and locker rooms in compliance with best safety standards. I'm going to anticipate another question because this has come up in the community recently, and I know it came up at the mayor's roundtable relative to restrictions associated with those funds. There is no executive order contained in the ARPA grant that requires recipients to grant recipients to require staff, the public, to wear masks or to be vaccinated. That is not contained in an executive order in that ARPA agreement. In the agreements, in the grant agreement, like all federal grant agreements, there is language in there that says that grantees must comply with applicable executive orders for grantees, federal rules, regulations, the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations. That is standard to every grant award that involves federal money. So if a jurisdiction is taking Homeland Security dollars for public safety, for emergency communications, they have those provisions in their grant agreement. If you're taking any funding for roads, which by the way, as we've talked about, grant funding is the primary source of funding for transportation. And it's federal dollars that are the primary source of that. It passes through the state down to local jurisdictions. Sometimes it is direct awards. It contains that same language. So there is no additional language contained in this ARPA grant that is different than what we have in any other federal grant agreements. The president has issued an executive order relative to COVID requirements for contractors, and that is under a different provision. Grantees are subject to the Code of Federal Regulations, applies to grantees. The FAR applies to contractors. We aren't a contractor, we're a grantee, and we are subject to the CFR, and the executive order does not apply to grantees. It applies to contractors under FAR, not CFR.
Thank you.
I agree.
She said. We have many discussions about this.
Is there any other questions for me
What are you most excited about?
on the remodel?
Mhm.
You know, really, when you look at our remodel, outside of getting rid of some of the smell, you know, the ability for us to bring our patrol officers downstairs, put them on that ground floor. So like right now they're on that upstairs. So every time a call comes out, they run down the stairs, up the stairs, down the stairs, up the stairs, which is really good for our cardio, but it increases that ability to fall, get hurt.
Mhm.
So having that access to a carport where the cars can be under a cover, have that ability to just go out that door, that flow is going to be a huge improvement.
When you guided us through the tour and you showed us some of the blind spots that our officers have as they're leaving to their patrol cars, can you express how that's been resolved? That was the biggest concern that I had for you
So
guys.
we're going to change, that'll change the entry point for the patrol officers. They're going to move over to that middle stairway. If you look at the map and into that carport, there's still going to be a couple blind spots because it's not fenced, it's not secured, but with some lighting and that carport will improve.
Okay.
It'll improve it some.
Good.
Anything else? All right, thanks, Chief.
We have the motion on that one?
Okay, yeah, so I would entertain a motion to approve completion of the 95% plan documents and go out to bid with the Sandpoint Police Department remodel project. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Councilwoman McAllister,
Yes.
Councilman Sparrow,
Yes.
Councilwoman Sherman, Councilwoman Rule,
Yes.
Councilman Groot,
Yes.
Councilman Darling.
Yes.
Motion passes. For the final item on the agenda this evening, city staff seeks approval to purchase an access control system and security upgrades. And Jennifer will provide a presentation for us again.
Yes, and I have the chief here once again because he can speak to some questions, and Cheryl is also available.
It's good for your cardio.
Sorry, I'm just going to share my screen for you again. So we were just talking about security, and this relates to it. This item before council is seeking approval to enter into an agreement with Ednetics, who is a voice over internet provider, as well as they provide access control devices and security systems, primarily to governments and schools is what their client base is. And that's why it provided the opportunity for us to piggyback on government pricing and get reduced pricing than if we were to go and just get pricing ourselves as an entity. We're proposing a security and access control system here at our city facilities. The design with the first floor remodel, as well as the design for the police department, anticipated this installation of this access control system. We also did some security reviews relative to access to our fire department after hours. And so we have when we're talking about access into our facilities, we have a blind door to the fire department. The public comes to, knocks on the door, and our fire department's just opening the door without visibility. So this also includes camera, the ability to provide access to the fire department and actually know who's there before our doors opened. And in addition to access control improvements and security improvements for our lake water treatment plant, we had an audit that was conducted earlier this year of our treatment facilities. And this is one of the recommendations, that we need to enhance the security at both of our plants. We would start with the lake water plant, and this would be included in any construction new build over at the wastewater treatment plant. The benefit of an access control system is, number one, it gives us the ability to see who is coming and going from our facilities using a cloud-based system. So police can see that. They can log into the system. They'd have the ability to see across all of our facilities, as well as at our security levels throughout the organization. We have that same ability. So if somebody's accessed, if there's a question whether a door is open, we have the ability to go in and check it. In terms of security issues, this gives us an ability, if there is an immediate emergency, to lock down our facilities. So we currently don't have that ability at any of our doors. So this gives us the ability to control that from within the facility itself. If police were aware of a threat and they were outside, they can log into the system and lock down our facilities off-site. So these are the improvements. The intent would be, the cost with this is significant, and I'm sure you saw that in there. It is for us to purchase a system, which is then expandable. And our approach would be, again, purchase of the system, address some of the key areas in City Hall as well as at the lake water treatment plant. But then as we move through future years with budgeting for this to become of our operations budget and do phased improvements throughout our city facilities in compliance with recommendations, both that come out through the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency and EPA relative to our treatment agencies. So this is an eligible expense, again, under our ARPA grant. It does pay for cybersecurity, security improvements to facilities. So we are proposing this as a grant-funded project.
Okay, any questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
So say perpetrators break into our building, and there's one in here, Chief Kuhn does lock down. I'm not able to drop kick the perpetrator down on the ground. Can we escape from the inside?
Yeah.
Or are we stuck with the perp?
No, you'd still be allowed to escape from. So you look at like the high school, for an example,
Yeah.
or some of those other, each one of those classrooms at our schools have the ability to put those schools into a lockdown by typing a code into the cell phone or into their phone. It triggers a flashing light, it triggers the alarms, it sets all the codes off. The same concept would be happening here. So anybody in the facility, if they're on the second floor, on the main floor, if they have an issue, they can trigger that. We could trigger that. It could lock the doors, trigger the alarms, flash the lights outside. That way, if the UPS guy is coming, he sees the flashing light, he's like, oh no, timeout. I'm going the other way, right? It
No.
gives us that
And he's
alert
like,
system.
No.
I don't believe you answered my question. Maybe I wasn't clear.
No, but you can still leave.
Okay,
So
thank you.
it doesn't, so fire code wouldn't allow you not to leave. So with all that stuff happening, when it locks down, you can still exit the building. You just can't come into the building. So
Unless you go through the open door.
unless you go through the open door that the guy ran out of. Yeah.
Mr.
The nice part about that too is just to add to it is that ability for us. So like late at night. So if we have customers that come in, they're in our lobby, they hit those dial tones or those rings, it goes into our squad room. They'll be able to, the officers from the squad room, they'll be able to answer them back and be able to see who's coming and going. So just that ability to communicate with those that are coming in and out of our facility at nighttime, it'll be a huge benefit that we don't have now. So.
Any other questions? Thank you, Chief. Is there anyone from the public out there that would like to comment on this issue? Madam Clerk?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Anyone from staff? No? Okay. Would entertain a motion to approve the resolution for city agreement A22-1940-2 with Ednetics Incorporated, access control device safety and security upgrades in the amount of $155,760.87 for installation of access control devices at City Hall, Fire Department, Police Department, and the Water Treatment Lake Plant. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Just one thing, I feel bad that we didn't ask Cheryl anything and she stayed here all night with us. So I'm just going to thank her.
You sure?
I'm okay.
Just let me go home.
End of discussion.
Councilwoman Sherman,
Yes.
Councilwoman Rule,
Yes.
Councilman Sprow,
Yes.
Councilman Darling,
Yes.
Councilwoman McAllister,
Yes.
Councilman Groot.
Yes.
Motion passes and this meeting is adjourned at 9:05.
Good night, everyone. Thank